Let's go. So this is the third podcast we're going to do.
The first one without masks.
First one without masks. I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
It's very, very exciting.
Big milestone.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. All right. I'll just jump right into it. The focus of this entire podcast, I've been trying to do this one for a long time. The general focus of it is going to be sexual intimacy from the Torah's perspective. And the first...
You should have warned me about that. Sensitive subject. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
The way I want to approach it is kind of just like very soberly from a perspective of like, how do we educate younger people to, in the end of the day, have healthy sexual relationships, right? Because I see right now, like in so many avenues, first of all, the topic is like embarrassingly underrepresented in terms of like people speaking about it in a real way,
right?
And
especially in a religious context.
Especially in a religious context, but even in a secular context, like from like a real sober kind of like just looking at like exactly what it is, I think it's underrepresented even secularly in like a good healthy way, but religiously also. And I think that's the idea is to ultimately raise adults that are going to have healthy relationship to sexuality. So the first and by the way, feel free to disagree with me at any point because I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just telling you like
we're in the same boat.
I think the first area I want is the way I kind of organize it in my mind is like self to relationship to other. So the first question I have is about masturbation. Like what's the correct Judaism and the Torah's perspective on masturbation? And I would link into that pornography as well for young people. And then also, do you think there's a distinction between single and married? Because I think there's like...
About the pornography or about the masturbation?
Both,
about both.
Actually. About both. I'm curious to hear what you think. Like if there's a... First of all, what the Torah would say is the appropriate way to kind of think about it, and is it permitted or not? Well, I guess we'll talk about it as well. And also, if you think there's a distinction between single and married.
On those two counts.
So it wasn't the best articulated question.
I understand what you mean. I think I understand what you mean. And if I don't touch on the points properly, then you can redirect me. So it's a topic that is, that in Judaism, if you look through the Tanakh, you won't find any real discussion of these issues at all. I mean, pornography obviously is a relatively new invention, but we're talking about in terms of masturbation and things like that. The only mention of it, of course, is in the context of Yehuda, the story of Yehuda and Tamar, the story of Yehuda's son that didn't want to have a child with when he married his brother's widow, didn't want to have a child with her. So it isn't spoken about in the way that it's thought of today, which is primarily for pleasure or gratification. It's not being done
in
to
the context
avoid
of being alone. Yeah,
right. I think even in other contexts, it's mainly done with pleasure in mind. Let's say, with the possible exception of people who are undergoing fertility, special fertility treatment, maybe, or something like that. But for the most part, it's done in a for pleasure-seeking purpose. I guess some people still use it as a method of birth control, but there are so many other methods of birth control today that it would be unlikely that would be the.
It's also ineffective method of birth control. Public service announcement.
Yeah,
not the best.
It's extremely unreliable.
Yeah.
That's another story.
Yeah.
But that's the only context in which it appears actually in Tanakh is as a, so to speak, a method of birth control. So in the Gemara, when you come to the Talmud, so there's already a discussion about it, and there's a lot of statements about it that are very negative and very, discouraging it strongly and attaching all kinds of dramatic consequences to people who engage in the behavior. That would have been, itself enough of a statement of the rabbi's view, a negative view. But what happened even further than that is that Kabbalah got involved, and the Kabbalistic literature really attached itself to this area of spilling of seed. So much so that it's such a it's such a central theme in some Kabbalistic thought that we know that in the Machzor of Yom Kippur, the Sephardic Machzor of Yom Kippur, during the confessions of the Yom Kippurs, it starts talking about the masturbation. There's a whole paragraph about it. It's not even one of the 613 mitzvot. It's not even there are so many things that people do that are literally prohibited in the Torah with a penalty of death or penalty of karet, which is excision from the Jewish people or spiritual excision from Olam Haba, however you interpret that. Doesn't even matter. There's so many severe prohibitions, and this one gets a whole paragraph and the details of it and all that. Kabbalah is really there's a lot of attention paid to it in Kabbalah that you would think it's disproportionate to, if you're looking from Tanakh to Kabbalah, it's like night and day. Even from Talmud to Kabbalah, there's some statements in the Gemara that are negative on it and discourage it and discourage people from, men in particular, it really only talks about men, from stimulating themselves so that they don't come to do it. But, and in the typical Agadic fashion, when the rabbis are speaking Agadot and Midrashim about certain behaviors, they speak in a way that is, hyperbole. You understand what hyperbole? Exaggerated. Mm-hmm. So they'll say, it's better to throw yourself into a furnace instead of embarrass somebody. I don't think that that's meant literally. Okay, there's maybe 1 in 1,000 commentaries that actually think that that's a literal statement. 99% of the commentaries will tell you, 99.9 will tell you that's an exaggeration. It's trying to say it's so bad to embarrass somebody. It would be better to be thrown into a furnace. It's not a literal statement that we throw someone into the furnace before doing that, embarrassing somebody. So the rabbis will speak Lashon Hara. It's like murder. It's the same as murder. Nobody's gonna execute you for saying Lashon Hara. Right? Even though it's equivalent to murder because you destroy the person's livelihood, the reputation, you affect them in ways that could ruin their life. Okay, in that way it's like killing them, but it's not literally killing them that we're going to execute you for doing it. So when the rabbis speak in hyperbolic terms about a sin and say, it's like when you masturbate, it's like you brought the mabul and destroyed the world. They're speaking in a hyperbolic fashion. In fact, the Rambam, in Perush the Mishnah, in his commentary on the Mishnah, the Rambam says, and actually the person who pointed this out to me was actually Rabbi Ben Chaim, believe it or not. He said, the Rambam says something very interesting. He showed us that he says that the rabbis said these things to scare people. Like when it speaks in ways that are very exaggerated about the consequences of masturbation in particular, that the Rambam says that these statements are made basically to scare people, to discourage them from engaging in the behavior. It's exaggerated. He straight out says that. Okay. Now, the problem with it. Going to the behavior itself and what is or isn't bad about it. Okay, just to understand what is the Torah's view, why it has a negative view, is in general to detach sexual pleasure or gratification from the context of a relationship. Because one of the motives of, let's say for example, a person has a fight with their wife, or a person's having difficulty on the dating scene and says, well, what do I need that for? I just have pornography and I just handle my urges independently of another human being. So they're actually they're destroying the world, meaning they're not going to reproduce, they're not going to make up with their wife and have a healthy relationship because they have another outlet. Right. It's very unhealthy in that sense, meaning they just close themselves off in a kind of a fantasy world of self-indulgence, and they don't have that as a motivator to have to, the truth of the matter is it's a motivator. The man who has to, the man and the wife, in order to be sexually satisfied, they have to get along with each other. Like that's part of the motivation, that's part of what gets you to get married. It's part of what gets you to keep your marriage healthy and happy and be romantic and all those things is part of the motivate. So that's how God made us. He made us that way, and it works. The system works. But if we shortcut the system, so then we are, we're losing out on that advantage by shortcutting the system. So that is the reason why the Torah says, it's like the mabul, you're destroying the world, meaning because you're not going to engage in reproduction and procreation because you have an outlet that you don't need. Because if you think about the truth of the matter is that the dumbest thing you can do if you're thinking in terms of, if you thought in purely Darwinian terms, survival of the fittest, or you thought of the issue of, natural selection and survival, right? Having kids is the most maladaptive thing you can do, because you create a dependent creature that now you have to care for their needs, you have to move them from place to place, you have to protect them, you have to invest in them, putting yourself at risk, causing you to have to, let's say, earn more money, for instance, which is one of the motives that maybe people don't want to have kids and want to earn more money, whatever. And there's so many things that are, again, that's why nowadays in America it's like, well, I'm not really sure if I'm going to have kids or not. It's a decision whether I want to be totally selfish or I want to actually contribute to the continuity of the species. Yeah. It's a philosophical question. The person doesn't want to give up their autonomy to do that. So the fact that God made it, that you have an instinct of sexuality, contributes towards making that decision, because if not for that, how many people would have had kids over the past thousands of years? Meaning that motivated the men to have kids, otherwise it's just another mouth to feed.
Right.
I hate to be blunt, but that's the reality of it, right? So that is a motivator to keep the relationship, to keep a person in a relationship, seeking a relationship, and it motivated people to marry young, which in my opinion, is very good, and is preferable, and also to keep the relationship healthy and happy, because you want to be able to have that outlet, and that's what the halakha does by encouraging in that. Now, the problem, as far as I see, is that because of a combination of two factors. Number one, and this is fading out a little bit, but it's in most circles, but the Christian influence has affected Jews, that there's this taboo on masturbation, that it's this evil thing, you're going to go blind and you're going to grow hair on your, I don't know, whatever weird things that they tell people. And then, so you have that. And then you have like certain mikubalim, or people, I wouldn't call them mikubalim because I wouldn't really recognize them as scholars of Kabbalah, but people have been influenced by Kabbalistic ideas that are related to this behavior and this aspect of life, that they've made it there's a whole industry. Guard your eyes. Yeah. Okay? Like, you have to, it's the most important thing. You have to keep your eyes off of things that might cause you to engage in masturbation or otherwise sexual fantasy, okay? For the reasons I said before, there is a reason why the halakha steers you away from that, right? But to make an entire industry around stopping a behavior, okay, it's not the way to go about actually stopping a behavior. You know what I'm saying?
Because of the negative focus.
Right. The way to... the Gemara says beautifully, if the menuval grabs you, if the Yetzer Hara grabs you, moshcheu lebet midrash, bring it to the Beit Midrash. Meaning you have energy, you have libidinal energy. That libidinal energy that you tap into, it says, Kol gadol mechabero yitzor gadol emenu. Anybody who's greater than their friend is also greater in their Yetzer Hara. Meaning that well of energy that they have, the creative genius of the Talmid Chacham, or of the scientist, or of anybody who has creative genius, or the artist. A lot of times they also have a lot, not the Talmid Chachamim, but a lot of times people who are great leaders, very charismatic, or great thinkers, or great contributors to art or science, also have like a great sexual temptation in their life. It's not just because they meet a lot of women. It's because they have tremendous energy and they can't harness all of it. They can't channel all of it. So if you can channel that energy to positive things, that's the way to go. The worst thing to do, in my opinion, is to obsess over these things, because what ends up happening is a person, I remember one of my rabbis said in high school, one of the kids who obviously had a lot of chutzpah was like, how come you don't teach us about how we're not supposed to engage in masturbation? They was asking the teacher in high school, I remember. And he said, because we have a rule, it's better for people to do it by accident than on purpose. And I know that you're not going to stop. Like teenage boys are not going to be able to resist, right? That's probably a realistic assessment. But what happens, in my opinion, is even worse, is that then they become obsessed with the guilt over it. It becomes a guilt. And that guilt, and I remember reading, and I can't remember where I have to find it, because I was trying to look it up. Somebody else had asked me the other day, and I have to find it, but I know I read it from the Chafetz Chaim. He said that the Satan, meaning the Yetzer Hara, gets you in two ways. First, it gets you to do the sin, and then it prevents you from doing mitzvot. Why? Because you come to put on your tefillin and you say, how can I put on tefillin? I did this bad sin. How can I open a book and learn Torah? I'm such a bad person. So the Yetzer Hara is like laughing all the way to the bank, because not only did you do one sin, but now you won't do a mitzvah because I'm unworthy of it, right? So it's that. I think when we were in Israel, we talked about it one day. Somebody asked about kids and what you should do. Somebody asked about it in one of the later sessions when we were wrapping up, and I had said, like, don't fight against the behavior, because that makes too much out of it, and that makes it too much of a focus of the psychic energy of the person. In a way, it's like, if the person's not going to be able to overcome that temptation at a particular time in their life and they're going to indulge in it, make the least out of it and let them move on to learning afterwards, and let them move on to doing things that are constructive, rather than get locked in guilt over something. Guilt is not a Jewish idea. Jewish mothers put guilt on kids, but not that type of guilt. I mean, that's a Christian idea, that a person should walk around with guilt and, we're guilty, we're unworthy, we need someone to die for our sins. That's not a Jewish idea. There's not. I was actually just talking about this last night in the class that, in Christian literature, the idea of being a martyr is a big thing. I suffer so much, my life is horrible, I'm doing it all for God. We don't have that in Judaism. There's no such thing. If Hashem b'simcha, it's supposed to be happy. It doesn't say walk around with a burden of guilt on your head all the time. There's no such idea. Feel guilty and unworthy. God has to send someone to die for your sins. That's their idea. They want you to feel unworthy and guilty. We don't have that idea. You did something wrong, okay, pick yourself up. You did something wrong, go to do something good. It's not a zero-sum game.
From the parenting perspective, do you think it should be a conversation between, let's say, a father and his son? I don't want to. I was supposed to bridge men and women. Also,
okay. So women, right? Yeah. Look, there's no halacha against women doing it. So, like, it's if you look in Sifrei Halacha, it'll say women should not do it. But then if you look at the footnotes, it's like, actually, it doesn't really say that anywhere. Like, it doesn't say that anywhere. First of all, the problem is that for some women, they need it to help them even in their relationship with a man, because they're not able to be stimulated properly, and therefore they need it as a supplement to sexual relations. My view is that, and this is not, I'm not saying this halacha, you have to ask your rabbi, whoever's listening to this podcast. Don't go with me, but my general view is that whatever is between a husband and wife, they should do whatever they feel that they want to do, because it's best that they take, unfortunately, like, this society has inserted into the minds, especially of the young people, who are exposed to all kinds of things that when I was growing up we were not exposed to until adulthood or later or never, exposed to all kinds of stuff that have put certain fantasies and desires in their head. And if those fantasies and desires are things that they feel can't be played out in the context of a halachic Jewish relationship, they're going to be dissatisfied and they're going to seek outside gratification, which would be very unhealthy for their relationship. So my philosophy is, and again, everyone should ask their own rabbi and don't take my word for it, but my view is that within a marital relationship, whatever the husband and wife need to feel satisfied, they should do, because that's channeling their energy into the right relationship. There are people saying, no, you have to do this way, you can't do that position sexually, you're not allowed to do this way, that way. I say, whatever the most lenient view is. Again, I'm not like saying Rabbi Ben Chaim might not agree with this, and maybe this is not the opinion of other people's rabbis. So I don't want to say a halachic view. I'm saying my personal view is to always go towards leniency, whatever the lenient position is, because we live in a generation where if we discourage people within their marriage from doing certain things by telling them they're not kosher, that they might not feel satisfied in the relationship, because for whatever reason they got into their head that they want a certain thing in the relationship, and now you're denying it to them, and they say, well, I can't have it in the context of my relationship, so I'm going to seek it somewhere else, and that would be much worse. So any of these violations, quote unquote, these things that are discouraged or in by some books or by some rabbis, they're all at worst rabbinically discouraged. They're not biblically discouraged, and therefore it's best for us to lean towards leniency within the marital relationship. That's my personal opinion, and I'm giving you the reason why. So for women, again, for a woman to be masturbating and therefore not seeking a relationship, not seeking marital fulfillment, not seeking becoming a wife and mother, so then it can have the same kind of of a counterproductive effect as a man doing it. Mm-hmm. So from that philosophical perspective, like if that's happening and it's taking the place of, that outlet is taking the place of a healthy relationship, so then it's also a problem. But within the context of a healthy relationship, if that's what's necessary for her to be happy in the relationship, then that it can be incorporated in a relationship within a husband and wife should feel like the Rambam basically, it says straight out, a man should do whatever, and same with a woman. A man can do whatever he wants with his wife as long as it's at a time that she's permitted to him, mm-hmm. and the same would apply vice versa, a woman with a man, meaning they should be able to feel comfortable to satisfy their needs with one another. That's the goal. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that self-stimulation helps with that, then it should be allowed, and in my opinion, and to the extent that,
would you say that for both male and female? Meaning like, not to get too graphic, but let's say guys don't like to finish inside there or whatever.
They right. So look, there are opinions that say if it's once in a while, it's allowed as long as it's not to the exclusion of regular intercourse. If you look in the books, the Sifrei Halacha that are printed, they'll always say, well, that's an individual opinion. We don't follow that. We don't follow that. And even, I know in our community, a book was published about the laws of tzniut, and it had the halacha and said, look, you should finish in the proper, in the vaginal canal, always in the vaginal canal. But there are opinions that say that if it's occasional, if it's not to the exclusion of regular intercourse, that it would be in the marital relationship permitted to do that. And that's why, again, I would say that if a couple has this issue, they should talk to their own rabbi about it, but there are opinions that are much more permissive and much more flexible that could be relied upon in individual situations. So I don't want to give like a blanket idea, but I'm giving you the general idea. Yeah. And if a person has a particular issue, every person should have a rabbi or mentor that they feel comfortable talking about, even the most intimate things with, because there's no reason not to. We don't have an idea that it's taboo. This isn't Christianity. This is Judaism. Yeah. Sexuality is not a problem. You open the Gemara. I remember I was in, I don't want to say what school, but I was in a certain Jewish college, not YU, and I spent one semester in it. And I felt that the education was not very good, so I actually left and I never even transferred my credits. I didn't want it on my record. Right. Anyway, I was in one class, and most of the people were very yeshivish. And I was also learning yeshiva at the time. That's why everyone went to this particular school. And so it was like an English class or something, literature, something, and we're reading a story, and it says, this guy went with this girl back to his apartment. That's literally all it said. Okay? The guy went with the girl back to his apartment, and they spent the night. Didn't say what they did. There was nothing graphic. This one guy's like, this is disgusting. This is a Jewish school. What are we reading? I said, have you ever read the Tanakh? Have you ever read the Gemara of Kiddushin? Every explicit graphic thing about body parts and intercourse, everything is in there. I mean, I would, maybe it's our upbringing in our society, but like I would blush to read what's written in there, to read it to a young person, a kid, to open that and read it. Every sexual thing is laid out so explicitly, and you're worried about, it says the guy went with the girl back to his apartment at night. Yeah. Maybe they were watching Netflix. You don't know. Well, they didn't have Netflix back then. But, it didn't say anything. The point is, we're not ashamed. We're not embarrassed. Yeah. So you should be able to go and say to the rabbi, look, I have this problem. I really want to be able to have this particular sexual desire that got in my head. Probably I was watching something. Probably I heard about it. Whatever got in my head. Who knows? Which is part of the problem with pornography. Yeah. But we'll get that. And so now that this entered my head, like, I won't feel satisfied if I can't, And I think that there's a lot of leeway, and there have been books written by rabbis. A lot of times they don't want to sign their name to it. There was one book that was put out in Hebrew a couple of years ago. I saw it online. It was published online, but it was by a Talmud Chacham. It was by somebody who really knew, but didn't want to necessarily had brought all these opinions that essentially said there's not only one approach to sexuality and all these things in halakha. We're used to the mainstream, maybe more conservative leaning approach. There are more liberal approaches that need to be taken into account nowadays to accommodate people's psychological needs and the society in which we live, and to keep things within the context of marriage is the goal. Yeah, there's too much allure outside to try to close off the outlet inside. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's the problem. And pornography, what it does is exposes people to fantasies of what a relationship, ridiculous ideas about relationship between men and women that are totally absurd, feed into certain fantasies. It's mainly geared towards men. There's some that's made for women, but it's a much smaller industry. Mm-hmm. Most of it is made towards men, and it caters really to the lowest of the, basically to the man's ego, to the man's maybe aggressive tendencies. There's a lot of violence in some. It depends on and there's been a lot written about pornography and how problematic it is, and they're
secularly,
and it's a huge debate. It's a huge debate because number one, nobody wants to hear that. So there's a guy, I think his name is Jensen or something, wrote about it. I remember reading an article about, I think his last name is Jensen. I have to look it up. He was controversial because he came out and said this. He said basically, he wrote a lot about it and he did a lot of research into it, and he would go and give these, and he would describe almost in like clinical terms what goes on in pornography. So when you read it, it sounds like horrific because you read because when you read it in a clinical description, it sounds worse, right? Because it's not glorified, it's not presented in a beautiful way, it's not presented. It's the same as if you take lyrics of some songs on the radio and you just read them as text. It's like, how is this person saying this? This is the most misogynistic thing ever. Somehow they get away with it. Most misogynistic, degrading thing that they say, it's okay, right? So some women say, oh, you're taking away the agency of women, sexual agency of women, and our bodies are, whatever we want to do with them. Okay, that I understand that perspective. But the other side is, a lot of people who were in the pornography, the industry previously, say that women are abused and mistreated and degraded in the industry, and that's why they left it. So it depends who you want to believe. Do you want to believe the women who are still in there and getting a paycheck and are saying that they are not degraded, or do you want to believe the ones who left the industry and said I was degraded and I left? Oh, they're just disgruntled employees. They couldn't get enough gigs, so they're bashing the industry. Or maybe no, maybe they're really telling the truth. And what I think about it is that the big problem is that it presents a fantasy idea of sexuality as being totally disconnected from a relationship. It also presents the sexual act or acts in a way that is unrealistic. And therefore create expectations that are not healthy for either a man or a woman to have, or what the role of a man or woman should be in a sexual relationship, and how it should progress, and how needs of the two partners in a sexual interaction should be considered, and all that. Like all of these issues, it's basically a fantasy for the egotistical, sexual, and aggressive fantasies and desires of the man to be gratified vicariously. That's basically what it is. And so what this guy, I think his name is Jensen, but I can't remember. He said that he was saying if that turns you on, basically degrading and hurting somebody, it turns you on, you have a problem. He's like, imagine if you were turned on by shooting people with killing them, maiming them. You'd say that person is a sicko. Right? So it's you have to think about what really is turning you on in the situation might be because it's feeding into your basest instincts. And even though, like I said before, we have to be honest about what our desires are, and we should seek to fulfill them in the context of our marriage, there's some desires that don't reflect well on us. And actually, once you really think about it, it's kind of it might change your perspective. Say I have a desire to hurt somebody. That's not healthy.
Yeah. And on that note, just you have to think about what your partner also wants. Obviously, different partners have different
right.
What they want, but many women would not, in the context of their own relationships, want to be subjugated to some of the things, some of the acts that you'll see.
Yeah, for sure.
In pornography.
Well, because they're all extreme, and part of the problem with pornography is it's like any area of pleasure that people are deriving pleasure. So in the beginning, a small amount can can be good. But then when you get desensitized to that, so you have to up it and make it more extreme, make it more elaborate, make it more crazy and more. So like it gets more and more and more disconnected from reality, more and more fantasy, in order to get the person even aroused, because they've become desensitized to like a normal thing. Probably pornography. I'm not like a pornography historian, but from what I understand from having read the psychological perspective of literature on it, pornography in the early days was like very basic. It was like very much more basic, like just people would watch and they would find it arousing, but it was like pretty vanilla stuff what they were doing. Now it's become totally insane. And part of the reason why is because people get desensitized to it, but that's part of the problem. And then they go to their relationship with their spouse and they're like, well, this is boring. Because on the look, the same thing can happen in so many other ways. You see, Hollywood celebrities. Oh, everything is perfect. The guy is chiseled and he's everything about the guy is perfect, and the women are looking at him. Oh, he's so handsome. And the guy's looking at the girls. Oh, and then real women, they're not like that.
Yeah.
So then you become dissatisfied with what you have.
By the way, to the point that also even clinically there is like psychogenic erectile dysfunction that like people will have, like will not be able to get aroused in normal sexual relation encounters when they want to, because of overstimulation mentally.
Interesting.
I actually ask patients who are like suffering from erectile dysfunction, like how much porn are you watching? How much do you masturbate? Because these things actually play into it.
Sure. And you know that most serial killers are compulsive masturbators.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, one of the things that
goes on what you were saying about
it connects with the aggressive impulse. Right. Most of them, like most arsonists, like not people who just burn down things for the insurance money. I'm talking about people who are like, who like to set fires, like, pyromaniacs or whatever. Right. Most of them are also masturbate at the fire, at the destruction of the. Right? So like it was one thing that Freud said that I thought was, and I might have mentioned it before to you one time. I know I've said it before. He said you could find a person who has dysfunction in the sexual area and not in any other area. But you'll never find a person with dysfunction in any other area that it doesn't also affect their sexual life. It connects because the libido is involved. So it's a matter of fact. I mean, if you look, every serial killer, there's some sexual element in it. If you look, it might be before or after they commit the murder, but there's almost, in every case there's a sexual element, and usually if it's after the death and it's something like that. So it's something that goes to it has to do with the fact that they are tying the aggression and the sexuality
That's
together.
Fascinating. Yeah. I never thought about it that clinically. Like, why is aggression and sexual stimulation so connected? Like a
lot of it has to do with power. Like there's a theory out there which I think is actually false, and it's been proven to my satisfaction at least to be false, that rape is not really a sexual crime, it's really a crime of power. And you'll hear that all the time, a lot, usually in progressive circles. It's been repeated, even though it was a theory that came out decades ago and it's been discredited by a million studies and it's not true, or at least not fully true. There could be an element of that, but the proof against it is that most rape victims are of an age where they'd still be considered attractive, where they'd still be considered to be appealing to the person, and usually the person has sexual urges that are that they want to have an outlet for, and they grab this person and they use them for their sexual urges. Now, is there an aspect of aggression to it? Of course, and I think a lot of pornography has to do with objectifying and making the woman into an instrument, which is a way of expressing power and slight aggression. And in the more extremes, there's actual violence going on. So there's definitely that part. But I'm not saying. But even if, let's say, you dial it back and you say, well, that kind of thing doesn't turn me on. That's I don't like smacking and punching and whatever aggressive, hurt, like painful sexual acts are not appealing to me. So good. That means you're more normal. Yeah. Right? But if a person finds causing pain to another person pleasurable, that would make me worry about their psychological health, I'm saying. But let's say they just find the fantasy of having all of this pleasure available to them endlessly and not having to actually have a relationship with somebody to get it. That's what's appealing to them. That is a problem, because once that idea is in your head, then you're almost setting yourself up for dissatisfaction with what you have, instead of being able to channel your desires into the realistic framework of your relationship. That's the problem that I see. It takes that away, and it causes like your own internal sort of fantasy world to be the dominant one, instead of having to share that world with somebody.
Right. So
who's actually a human and a person, and has to be treated with some level of respect.
So let's go to the root. Like raising kids. Right now I have a 6-month-old boy. Right, Bezar Hashem is going to be 10 at some point and start maybe having certain ideas
thoughts
in
and
his
ideas.
head.
Yeah.
So how am I supposed to raise my son to have a healthy perspective on sexual intimacy, between masturbation, between eventually Bezar Hashem being in his own relationship with his wife? Like, how am I supposed to cultivate that in a healthy way, without guilt and without shame?
I think that my thought about that is it's not even really a halachic issue, or it's more of a psychological issue.
Right.
So maybe it's a different hat. But my philosophy in that is that these desires and interests emerge naturally from a person. Nobody goes and says you're supposed to be attracted, sexually attracted to people now, and they say, "Oh, I am. Oh, then I'd better start to." There's a funny story about this couple that they had a son that they wanted to make him very holy. Supposedly a Jewish story, even though this is not a Jewish idea at all, right? They wanted to make him very holy, so they never let him see a girl in his life. They put him in an attic. They fed him underneath the door food. He only saw men. His rabbi learned with them. His father learned with them. He never even saw his mother, sisters. Nobody's right? So one day his father said, okay, he's not ever seen a girl. He doesn't know what is a girl. He has no sexual interest, whatever. I'm going to take him for a walk outside for the first time. So they start walking around, and what walks down the street? What does he see? Some girls. Oh no! So he says to his father, "What are those?" Because he's never seen girls before. And the father doesn't know what to say. He says, "Those are ducks." So he says, "Can I have a duck?" But what's the idea of the story? It's natural for the human being to be attracted to members of the opposite sex in 99% of the cases. Let's say 98% of cases. But to have sexual desire, and even more than that, because the total lack of sexual desire is extremely rare. So it's natural. So you're not going to have to instruct your child to have that desire.
Right.
What they're eventually going to become aware of desires in their own body and show interest in, attractive people, and maybe they're going to see things on the computer. We don't even know what they're going to be looking at by the time he's 10. And 10 years from now, who knows what? We're going to have some holograms. They're going to see, they're going to be exposed, and at that point, they'll have these desires. And I think that the best you can do is to, first of all, try to always, and this is true in every area, try to expose your kids as much as possible to the healthiest visual and auditory stimuli that you can. Like, show them, if they're going to watch things on TV, or they're going to watch movies, or they're going to listen to music, try to make it wholesome and make it as reflective of your values as possible. 99% of songs on the radio have to do with love. That's just the way that it is. Almost every song is a love song. But there are love songs and there are love songs. There are love songs that are beautiful and very moving and nice, and then there are some that are not so nice and not so beautiful. And what they're exposed to makes a difference. What kind of visual things that they see also make a difference. So if you expose them to a visual and auditory stimuli that are healthy and reflect your values, that's not going to make them all become puritanical. But I'm saying it won't encourage them to develop their fantasies in a way that's going to be difficult for them and cause difficulties for them. And obviously, don't give them pornography to look at. They're going to seek it out if they want to, and it's available to them. Like, you're going to, that's just the reality.
Right.
They're going to seek it out. They're going to look. They're going to see. they're gonna learn that you're supposed to limit that when they go to yeshiva. They're gonna tell them hopefully in an appropriate way and hopefully in a healthy way.
That's kind of the problem,
right?
Meaning, like,
so
I fear the repression. Meaning, like, I don't want it to be something that's repressed
from the system.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think this.
Maybe by then we'll have a healthier system. Be optimistic about it.
But how do we cultivate that? Is my question. Meaning, obviously, the attraction, 98% of the time,
it's going to come from within.
It's going to come from within. I'm not saying
and the desire, like the sense of the body, and
saying,
that the body is a source of pleasure. Right. That the child is going to discover that on their own. Right. Boys and girls discover that on their own.
Yeah.
And
by the way, younger than you think.
Oh, right? Way younger than people. Like I know, even younger than that, possibly. Right. I mean, that's one of the things Freud said. That don't you notice that kids are playing with their body much younger than you ever thought? And it can't be. Kids are innocent. They're innocent. Yeah. Not about innocent or not. That's coming from your Christian. Right. That's coming from the Christian belief that it's not innocent to have sexual desire, and there's something guilty about it. There's nothing guilty about it. It's natural, normal. That's like saying I'm hungry. I feel guilty. Why do you feel guilty? You have a desire for food. You shouldn't have desire. Desire is bad. That's stupid, right? If your body has desires, that means your body is healthy and normal. If you don't have desire, there's something missing, right? That's a problem. Desire is good. Desire is what motivates people to do things. Yeah. Okay? There's this famous story about the rabbis asked for the Yetzer Hara to be taken away, and then nobody got up in the morning. Right. Nobody did anything. Nobody went to work. The Yetzer Hara moves you. Okay? So it's okay for them to have those desires and explore their body. They're going to figure that out themselves. They're going to figure out more than you're going to want to know and more than they're going to tell you. Mm-hmm. And one day they might come and say, hey, Dad or Mom, I was wondering about this thing that I did, or about this thing. Is it okay? Is it this? Or I was wondering about where babies come from. My thought is, tell them the truth when they ask. You understand? In other words, you don't have to put the idea in their head, because they might not be ready for it. But if they come and say, how are babies made? Don't say some made up ridiculous thing about whatever people say the stork brings a baby, or they're made in a factory. Don't tell them that. You tell them the truth. The man and woman, they put their bodies together in a certain way, and explain it to them, and it feels good to them. It's a pleasurable experience that they have together, a husband and a wife, and it's nice. And then a baby is created in the belly of the mom. There's nothing wrong with that. You tell them. Like the Torah talks about it. They're going to read the Chumash. Yeah. What are they? We became so Christian. Okay, there are things a kid is not ready to understand yet. But first of all, they understand more than you think. Right. And they just think you're hiding from them certain things. That's number one. Number two, better that you explain it to them than Joey in the park that's going to tell them something that's not right.
So that's really what I'm getting at. Yeah. Eventually they're going to be exposed to it. How do you channel that exposure into ultimately cultivating a healthy child?
If you always have a feeling with your child that they can talk to you about anything and they never have to feel embarrassed, they will come and say, oh, Joey told me this, Bobby said this. Oh, well, that's not exactly right because your 6-year-old friend doesn't really know anything, or whatever. This is how it actually works, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's husband and wife, they up to their level of understanding, it's okay.
Right.
Like, I remember a rabbi telling me when he was from Morocco, and they used to memorize Mishnah and Gemara. He's reading things in the Mishnah and Gemara, Masechet Kiddushin Ketubot, says, Biyah shelo kedarka, talking about sexual intercourse, natural, unnatural, this, that. He's like, we didn't even know what we're saying. I'm like a 7-year-old boy repeating this. I don't know what that is, But they didn't have a problem having the kids do it and learn it and read these texts. Oh, you lie with a woman. What does it mean you lie with a woman? Oh, the husband and wife, they go to bed together. Their bodies are together. They won't at first understand all the anatomical pieces, but eventually, don't make it a secret of things.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as with alcohol. Okay. Why do you have historically speaking, maybe now it's changed, I don't know, but historically speaking, alcoholism was rare in the Jewish community. And the reason that they give for why it was rare is because it was never a taboo. So the kid gets a little bit of wine. He's like, whatever, it's nothing. It's a little bit of wine. Oh, we have a little bit of wine. Sometimes you can have too much wine. The person gets drunk. They see that in Purim or whatever. They think it's funny, but they know, a little bit of wine is okay. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing mystical about it. There's nothing mysterious. And so therefore, there's no allure to it. But what you hide is what they're going to want to know the most. Like what they used to skip the last part of Sefer Shoftim when they would teach Navi, because it talks about Pilegesh Begiv'ah, it's the rape of a woman, which is horrible, And I remember one of my rabbis saying, you know what we all did that night when we went home? Looked up the chapter that they skipped, and everyone wanted to know what is it that they're skipping. That's all you're doing, is saying there's a secret here, and it's going to find out. So it's just, if you have a relationship with your kids that they can talk about anything with you, and if they're having experiences in their body or wondering about things, they can ask you.
Yeah.
Then I remember myself, my parents actually did this very well. I remember I went to my mother when I was like 8 or 9. I'm like, how are babies made? She just explained the whole thing to me. Like totally, like it was no big deal. They just explained it. I'm like, I didn't know. I don't know if I'd grown up in today's world with everything that everyone's exposed to. Maybe I would have known by then. But, I would have Googled it.
Yeah.
But then you asked your parents, or I asked my father about certain bodily things. I was never uncomfortable with my parents. They never responded in a way like, oh, shocked. Yeah. Oh, no. And my father's Iranian, and my mom's American, but from the old school. But I guess she was also raised very openly, and I think that was good. There was never any kind of a taboo around the subject, and therefore you felt comfortable talking about it. Not that we sat around the dinner table talking about it. I don't think that's appropriate for mixed company. It's something that should be private and intimate, and that's okay for the kids to understand too.
Right.
Oh, this is something a husband and wife do, but we don't talk about it publicly because it's something that we share in our personal relationship, and one day you will have that with your spouse too, but you can always ask me about it. But when there's a group, we usually don't talk about it with a group. We talk about one-on-one. We talk about, that's all.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. Communication, be open, so they never have that guilt or fear to talk about it.
Right. So you think like...
There's a Gemara that says one of the rabbis got up and said, watch after me with my daughter-in-law. Don't let me go alone with her. Meaning, what is that telling you? There's a story about Abaye one time was walking and he saw this girl and guy, single, go into the forest. And he's following them. And he's like, oh, they're probably going to have some rendezvous, illicit thing. They walk in the forest together, they come to the other side and they say goodbye and they leave. He said, I can't believe it. If I had been with a girl like that, I wouldn't be able to just say goodbye like that. How would I do it? That's Abaye in the Gemara saying that. How about the best of all is Amram Chasida. That one time there were a bunch of girls up in the attic and he lifted a ladder that was only 20 men could lift, meaning that he had like a lot of energy. And he climbed up the ladder to go in to see these girls, and then all of a sudden he screams, fire, fire, and everyone comes and takes him down from the ladder because he realized he was about to do something bad. He's called Amram Chasida. He's the pious one. Why is he pious? This guy sounds like the opposite of pious. He's like trying to spy on girls. He's a voyeur. He's not, or whatever he was planning on doing with the girls. I don't know. Maybe he was planning on being, Don Juan. I don't know. He was going to go seduce the girls. I don't know what his plan was, but it wasn't good. And he stopped himself. What made him Amram Chasida? They controlled himself. That's why he's considered pious. Not because he didn't have the desire. But look at how the Gemara lays it out right there. Wouldn't you be embarrassed? Don't you think Abaye was embarrassed in the Gemara for thousands of years? It's now written, Abaye said, I couldn't control myself in the forest with a girl. And Amram Chasida says that he went up to the attic to chase after the girls. It says it right there. And there's other stories. There's a story about one rabbi that he had stopped having like a very passionate relationship with his wife, and she was upset about that, so she dressed up as a prostitute or whatever, dressed up as a woman, another woman, and seduced him. But it was really his wife. Mm-hmm. And he felt so bad, he went in the oven, he's like, I want to burn myself up, I did the wrong thing, I committed adultery, and it was just his wife. But the point was, like, that's written in the Gemara for everyone to read it. About this rabbi. Why? Because there's nothing to be embarrassed about that people do that. It's like people have sexual desire, and the Gemara is open about it and never hides anything.
Right.
And that's it's an artifact of, and even Islam is much more open. We adopted our attitudes from the Christian influence. Even Islam is very open about sexuality, too much maybe. Mm-hmm.
For a parent who, I don't want to harp on it too much, but like for a parent, let's say they notice like their kids in the bathroom for too long.
Yeah.
And like, they're like 12, 13. Leave it be.
I wouldn't do anything.
All right, leave it be.
When they're ready to come talk to you, I'm talk to them.
Right.
Look, I wouldn't put in their hands too much. Like as they get older, especially in a way, but even when they're younger, you have to be careful with what kind of material and media they're exposed to. But I think the mistake that people make, this is what I would say, and it's a mistake that people make with their kids, but it's actually a mistake they make with themselves and they transfer it to their kids, is that they're more concerned that the kid might be masturbating in the bathroom or something like that, right? They're more concerned about the act that they're doing than what they're learning about sexuality that might be unhealthy and affect their future relationship. They're more worried about the action they're doing. Who cares about the action? I'm not saying it's nothing. I'm speaking hyperbolically also. I'm saying that obsessing over that detail is exactly the opposite of what really the concern should be. The concern should be, what is the kid learning about sexuality and about his body that's right or wrong, that's going to affect his future. That's where the concern should be. And that should be the emphasis. And by guilting him over one action that he does is just going to make him become a better liar.
Yeah.
That's one of the things you learn about kids. They just become more sneaky and more lying, as opposed to opening up dialogue. Oh, make sure that they know that they can talk to you, and then they'll come and say, is this okay that I'm doing, or I don't feel right about it, or this. They may come to you with feelings about what they're doing, and then you have an opportunity to say, oh well, X, Y, Z, to share your thoughts about it or give them perspective, and within what they're able to handle. But obsessing over the action is the same thing that people do when they're older, which is that they obsess over the action that they did, and then it holds them back from actually doing meaningful stuff.
Right.
As they're so busy writing 10 paragraphs about I masturbated and I killed many nefashot that are floating around, or whatever it says in the Machzor. Yeah. Again, since I'm leaving now, I can say anything I want, right? I can say anything I want on this podcast. I'm leaving. I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to be hiding there from all of you. So you'll know where to find me, but I'm hiding. No, but if I could cut that out of the Machzor if I had my own minyan, I would skip it. I would skip it. I wouldn't read it. Why are you reading that in Yom Kippur? Why is that what you're focusing on? That's the emphasis. That's the worst thing people are doing in this room. It boggles the mind that that's such an emphasis. Okay, the Mekubalim, that's their area. They have their own idea about how terrible that sin is for mystical reasons. But for the regular person who's talking about like what they need to work on, that's what you have to write an entire paragraph. Everything else is one word. That's an entire paragraph. And then we wonder why we have these psychological issues.
Right. Yeah. And you touched on it exactly before, because I forget what exactly we were saying, but I asked you whether single or married, and like in one sentence, you answered it as like, the idea behind the like why it was so emphasized was because in the end of the day, it wants you to bring the sexual experience into the relationship, right?
But whether you're single or married,
that's the
relevant.
idea. Yeah. So precisely, like if you're single, the idea is we don't want you to stay single that long. That's not necessarily the best thing. I mean,
which is what the rabbis are talking about when they talk about, you're destroying the world. You're not going to be reproducing it. Right. It's true.
Yeah. And if you're married, the same thing. Meaning, like you said, you don't want to get into a fight with your wife, or even have problems in that area, right? Let's say it's difficult in a marriage to have sex in a normal way. Like let's say your wife is experiencing some pain or whatever.
Right.
Like things come up. You don't want to pull back and say, "Oh, well, I can."
We'll just forget it.
Yeah, let's forget it. Like I can take care of myself. You don't want to do that. You want figure out how to get help for that particular problem. There might be a medical issue. There might be a psychological issue. Also, like the sexual intimacy is a very significant part of
it's a glue that holds the relationship together in a lot of ways.
So I think there's a lot of wisdom actually in wanting, like in the sentiment. I think that, like I think you're saying, it's been hijacked and blown out of proportion to the point of like repression and creating a taboo that like maybe is doing more harm than good.
Yeah, a lot of times it does. It becomes a psychological baggage that people carry around.
Yeah.
And this fear. And that's not really what Judaism is about. We're trying to encourage the positive. What's the positive outcome of it? What positive direction is it trying to guide us in?
Yeah. I had you basically touched on this. I don't even want to. I was going to ask about like watching pornography in the context of a relationship.
Right.
I think you touched on it basically, like that it's okay if within the context of your relationship. That seems to be. I mean, I'll let you answer it, but it seems to be like if you and your significant other decide that that's appropriate for you.
I think it's problematic. I don't think it's the best route to go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's because in general, like there are halachot, for example, when you're not supposed to think about another woman when you're with your wife. You're not supposed to think about another man when you're with your husband, even if you had more than one wife. Meaning in the olden days when I had more than one wife, you're not supposed to, because what ends up happening is what you're really doing is you're just using your wife. You're thinking about someone else, you're fantasizing about someone else, not your wife, and you're just using her to gratify your fantasy about someone else that's really you're thinking of as you're engaged in the action, even if it was another wife of yours. But the point is, you're not in the moment with your spouse that you're actually supposed to be connecting to. That's a problem for, I think in general, pornography has a negative impact on relationships because it takes you out of the relationship that you're supposed to be in, and it creates this alternative fantasy. And even though I'm not saying it's like necessarily causes like irreversible damage to the relationship, but it wouldn't be good if you basically are not mentally engaged with your spouse when you're intimate with them physically. And that's what would happen if you're looking at pornography, like in anything but an educational setting, because you're basically going to be fantasizing about something other than what you're doing. I think that contributes to the same problem.
Yeah. So you would say, like, if you wanted to bring, because you were saying before that people have certain fantasies,
right?
It's good to bring it into the context.
If there's a way to do it,
right?
Yeah. If there's a way to do it that won't damage. I mean, but that would be up to. I think that's more problematic. It's more problematic than beneficial because it's going to lead to worse things. I can't see how it would contribute to the intimacy between the partners. If I'm wrong and there is some way then that maybe they have in mind, then I would defer to them. Like I try to make my positions on what people should do in the bedroom like as liberal and flexible as possible, because I feel like people need that flexibility in their lives. But but in that particular boundary, I feel like it would be harmful intrinsically to them, because it would be involving imagery and sights and sounds of other people besides their partners and their behavior. And I think that might be I would think that would be intrinsically damaging, right? To them.
Yeah. So in general, you would say the fantasies should be targeted to your significant other. I think so. I think that's the idea. I mean, there could be some like educational videos to help a person, learn things that they can do with their spouse that they will find pleasure in, that are not meant to be a fantasy, like to arouse you to a fantasy, but are meant to guide you in enhancing your relationship with your spouse. Maybe there could be something like that that would benefit a husband and wife to see. Okay.
But I think if you're substituting other people, it becomes dangerous.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Like the education before marriage, like in terms of, I just thought of this right now, but like for men and women, like how should that look like? Like I know, women it might be a little bit more difficult to answer right now, but like how should you let's say the yeshiva bachur who's never been exposed, he's never seen a girl, whatever. Or even for a guy, he lived in the attic. What should the premarital sexual education look like?
Well, I think we have a curriculum for it that's been traditionally, first of all, Hilchot Nida, of course, is the halachot of it, and there's usually guidance in terms of Shalom Bayit and other things, which I think I found when I was although it's been a quarter of a century, but I found that it was pretty good. It was helpful. I know that those who do it now also find it to be helpful. Find the mentorship that they gain, or the interactions that they have with the rabbi that's teaching them, to be very helpful. So I generally speaking, I think it's I think it works well.
No, I'm saying specifically with regard
What
to
should the
intimacy.
content be?
No, with regards to intimacy, meaning like.
Oh.
So here's the thing. Like,
Well, it depends on what the level of the person is.
Right.
In other words, like it's really going to depend, like you're saying, on what their starting point is. I mean, if they really, some people might come, they don't even know the mechanics of. I mean, I've heard. I mean, I've never met anybody like that, but it's not in my circles, you know.
Right.
But I've heard that there have been situations where, like the boy and the girl, whatever, the husband and the wife, they don't know what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Like they don't have any roadmap at all because they've really been isolated. So then you have to guide them and give them instruction and warn them about what it's going to be like. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I remember that actually in my Chatan class. Oh, in the beginning, it's not going to be a very protracted experience. It's going to be this, that, because you don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the woman doesn't, and the woman requires totally different kind of attention, and it has to be more sustained, and it's going to be difficult to provide that in the early stages where the man is really inexperienced and all of that, and so it's hard. Yeah. These things, I think they do tell you. I mean, I remember something like that being told to me when I was in a Chatan class, I believe, unless I'm imagining it, but I'm pretty sure that I was told that. And so I think instructions about that and about the obligation to make sure that both partners are having their needs addressed is really important. And to the extent that mechanics need to be spelled out, it's going to really heavily depend on what the person's point of departure is, what they do or don't know, what they have or haven't been exposed to. Nowadays, you could have somebody who has way too much background, and experience, and you'll be more naive than they. You'll be more of a novice than they are. And then you'll have some situations where they really don't know even basics. I mean, I don't think we're going to encounter nowadays in our community or in this setting people who don't know basic mechanics.
Yeah, I think even in terms of the anatomy, like I think it's significant. I think
men don't know women's anatomy. Men don't know women's anatomy,
and women don't know women's anatomy either.
Women don't, right? I mean, women's anatomy is a challenge for definitely for men and probably for both men and women. Men's anatomy, like. The system works. It's sort of like self-explanatory. Yeah. So it doesn't end up being that much of a. You need to get something. Okay. So we're just recording. So it's it doesn't end up being that much of a difficulty. I think it's more self-explanatory. Although I'm sure that there's some things that women could learn too, and even men could learn about their own bodies that they might not know. I'm sure that there's something to be learned. But the neglected area is the area of the woman's body, and it's the role that it should be playing in their interaction, which a lot of times we know that it's overlooked, and that's part of the problem. So no, for sure, education should focus on that. But again, from the starting point of the person that's being taught or being introduced to the material, because some people nowadays come with. There are three kinds of people. There are people who really don't know. There are people who know too much, and there are people who think they know, which a lot of times are the most difficult because you have to unlearn first and then relearn. Yeah. So that could be the hardest because they think that they know. Oh yeah, I know all about that. Yeah. But they've seen pornography. Yeah. And in that world, like they're not getting accurate idea of how things work.
Yeah, I think for our culture, that's probably the biggest problem. Is like. When the sexual experience that you want to take into any kind of relationship is so focused on you as an individual and not realizing that in a healthy sexual experience, if you're really focusing on yourself, it's not going to be good. Your significant other, your wife, your husband, whatever, they're not going to appreciate that, and also eventually that's not going to be arousing to them. Right. Like the
you just become a tool.
Themselves. Yeah, you're just a tool, and you're not like. So I think that like focus on in the sexual experience being giving.
There's a ton of absurdity to the scenes that they have in their mind, like that there's no build up, there's no like emotional part to
even
it.
Throughout the day, like if you're not being a nice person throughout the day, like women are.
There's got to be some romance. There's got to be some love. There's got to be some wooing of. Even talks about in the Gemara that that one rabbi hid under the bed. It's a famous story to hear what his rabbi said and how the rabbi was like schmoozing with his wife, like being romantic with her and everything as a sort of foreplay into what they're going to do. And the student was like, "What's the rabbi doing? He's talking like that." First of all, get out of my bed. Yeah. Get out from under my bed. But which is how the story kind of ends. But the point is that that's on one hand, it's telling you it's inappropriate to violate people's privacy, and that what goes on in your bedroom is your own business. And I think that's important to know, and nobody should be telling you beyond certain basic framework what you should be doing in there. That which is what I was saying before. But beyond that, it tells you that there's a huge psychological aspect to sexuality, especially for women. Yeah. But even for men, the problem is that for men it has been warped by what they are fed by the culture, and that they expect it to be very focused on their own immediate gratification and very not requiring much of them. Yeah. Not requiring much of them emotionally or physically. Yeah. And that's not good. It has to be a collaborative effort to be good. Yeah. And to build connections. Otherwise, there's also resentment. The partner feels they're not being treated appropriately. It's not just that their sexual needs are not being satisfied. It's also that they feel that they're being mistreated. They're being made into an object. They're being degraded. They're being, they're not cared about, which is much deeper. It's like one of my rabbis said when I was younger. He said, I wasn't even married at the time, but he said, he was telling us about marriage. And he said, when your wife says, "Why didn't you take out the garbage?" she doesn't mean, "Why didn't you take out the garbage?" She means, "Why didn't you love me enough to think that you should have taken out the garbage?" Right? Meaning there's a whole context, emotional context to every interaction that you have to be aware of. Yeah.
That's literally, so as I was saying, literally the whole day, if you think that you're just going to go into the room and you're going to take off your clothes and she's going to be, that's not at all, that doesn't work for women. That works for guys. If
it does.
If it does. But much more likely for a guy not to be prepared, and you could be very tired and she'll be able to get her way. Right. But the opposite being true, very unlikely. Right. Very unlikely.
There has to be an emotional component for most. Yeah. No, not that there isn't a physical component at all. And I think there is a spectrum in terms of women's physical needs. Men's physical need for intimacy is usually higher, usually, but it's not always true. Yeah. You have to know who your partner is. Some men have less, and the women are upset because the men have less. And because they feel like they're not wanted, and they feel offended, or they feel that they're not being satisfied because the husband has a low sex drive. Mm-hmm. Other times, the woman might have less, and the husband is dissatisfied. Sometimes they're evenly matched. That obviously would be the best. But usually there's some difference. But I'm saying women are not totally just about the emotional. Yeah. Men are not totally just about the physical. There's spectrum. There's a spectrum for both, and you have to know. Sure. But if you don't even get to know, if the husband can't explain what he wants, or the wife can't communicate what she wants, so then you have a problem because you're not going to be able to address each other's needs, and that itself is the underlying issue. And that's why somebody takes refuge in self-stimulation, because they say, well, just forget it. Yeah.
What you just reminded me to ask this. What do you think should be the approach, or what do you think the harm is in premarital sex with different partners? Meaning, for somebody who maybe wasn't necessarily educated in the best way about intimacy before marriage. What do you think should be their approach?
What do you mean?
Meaning
their approach when? When they're getting married, or when they are before that?
I mean, ideally before that, right? But
well, it really comes back to the same idea that if sexuality becomes this free radical and it's not embedded in a relationship that's healthy, so then it's something that might even be holding a person back from establishing a meaningful long-term relationship, building a family, and contributing to the continuity of the Jewish people, the species, and the world. Mm-hmm. Which is what the rabbis talk about when they talk about the flooding the world and all that. That idea of disconnecting sexuality from a higher purpose in the context of a loving, ongoing, permanent relationship, hopefully permanent relationship with another person. So it's in a way the same as the issue with self-stimulation, that you're talking about someone who, instead of wanting to deal with the serious work of building a sexual relationship within an emotional relationship in a shared life, which makes it much more of a challenge and requires much more of the person. They'd rather have short, interludes where they gain satisfaction from them and they move on to the next person, which is just another way of having your sexuality be more of a self-indulgent thing. And I'm assuming we're not talking about long-term girlfriend. Not that that's allowed halachically, but I'm saying there is a difference psychologically. If a person has a long-term relationship, obviously in a outside of a marital relationship, halachically it's not allowed, but this is the reason, because we're showing, the only halachic way to show that the sexual relationship is subordinated in a framework of something higher is to have a marital relationship. That's why it's called kiddushin. It's holy. It's making the Torah recognize, I mentioned it in one of our other podcasts that's coming to my mind, that the Rambam says when he talks about marriage, and he says, in the old days you would meet a prostitute, if they both agreed to have a one-night stand, the man would give money, they would go to a place, they would have a thing, and then the man would move on, and that was okay before the Torah came, right? But then the Torah made kiddushin, where you give something to the woman, but it's permanent, right? So the Rambam compares like prostitution to marriage. It's weird, but what's the idea? The idea is that there's that interaction becomes a part of something bigger. It's not just a freestanding interaction of gratification anymore, an exchange of some sort, but it becomes one interaction of many within the context of a relationship that is bigger than the sum of its parts. That's what makes it holy. That's what makes it special. So psychologically, you could argue that any long-term relationship could also provide a framework, but the Torah says that unless it's something where there's commitment involved that is legally recognized, why is it that a couple can live together? I'm not talking about a Jewish observant couple or a couple in our community, wouldn't happen, hopefully, but in the secular world, you can have a couple living together for years, and then all of a sudden they get engaged and they break up, or they get married and they break up. It's like, you live together for years. How is it that, first of all, the guy doesn't want to commit and get married, or maybe the girl doesn't, or whatever, they don't want to get married, and then when they finally do, all of a sudden they get divorced. It's like, why? That doesn't even make any sense. But once it felt like a commitment, they couldn't handle it anymore. In other words, getting up every morning and saying, I could leave or I could stay, I always have the door open. Meaning it's still just a string of individual interactions with the other person. But as soon as it becomes an entity, a framework that exists separate from us, meaning it doesn't matter whether you're happy with your wife, you had a fight with your wife today, you're on good terms today, you agreed today, you disagreed, she this, you did that, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's an institution of marriage that holds you together, whether you like it or not on any particular day, because you committed to each other in a marriage. That's it. The marriage is bigger than you, so to speak. It's larger than the two of you. As long as it's a girlfriend and a boyfriend, even if it's long term, even if they live together, either one of them can get up at any moment, walk out, and it's over. It's dissolved. So it's just day by day. It's a day by day interaction. Nothing is bigger than the interactions between the two of them. Okay? Because they can always just walk away. And so that's what makes marriage different. It's a commitment that you're saying, I'm committing, and that commitment you're making to the other person creates a relationship that makes demands on you. It's not just your moment-to-moment liking of the other person, their liking of you. It requires something of you. Yeah. It's higher than you. It's higher than either of you.
So what's the incentive for somebody who has a fear of that kind of commitment to commit in that case?
Well, it's going to depend on the individual, but look, that's the Torah tries to uses the incentive of sexuality, by saying to you, you're not supposed to, you're not allowed to. So an observant person that says, well, I'm not allowed to masturbate, I'm not allowed to have premarital intercourse, I'm not allowed to have flings and go to prostitutes, so I have to get married. I mean, it sounds very unromantic. I apologize, but but that's part of the reason why in the religious community people get married so young.
Yeah.
And I remember when we had a discussion on the marriage committee here years ago when we were talking about the low rate of marriages, that the rate had really dropped in the Messiah community. I think it's gotten better, but it had dropped for a few years significantly. People weren't getting married. And one of the things that one of the rabbis brought up was, in the religious segment of the community, that isn't happening. It's happening mainly in the non-religious. Why? Because the religious won't go have a fling outside of marriage. They won't go have a girlfriend live with the girlfriend. They're not going to do that. They know that they're not supposed to. And even if they wanted to, they'd be too embarrassed because they're religious. Right? So they're not going to do that. So therefore they're going to get married because they want to have an outlet for those desires. It channels it. So that's, okay, maybe a lower way to look at it, but it's an incentive. It works. It's a lo lishma.
Yeah.
So but it's not really lo lishma. It's not really lo lishma. It's not really not for its own sake. It really is for its own sake, because what it does is it teaches you what the higher purpose of that instinct that God put in you is. You know, by not letting you have those outlets, really what Hashem is telling you is that wasn't put in you just to give you gratification. The fact that it gives you gratification is a motivator so that you build something higher out of it. You know, just like the fact that you want to eat food, it sustains your body. That's true. It can also be used for mitzvot, and you can also do amazing things with food, eating on Shabbat, eating on Yom Tov, saying brachot. There's all kinds of mitzvot that come along with eating, that you sanctify the eating. You make it something. You can eat a korban in the Beit HaMikdash, whatever. All kinds of different settings in which that could be holy. So what the Torah is telling you is that, it's sort of like using the carrot to bring you to the idea of marriage, but it also teaches you like what is really the function of sexuality. And as much as there's a psychological and physical aspect, and the happiness of the couple is important, and the satisfaction of the couple is very important, but because that's but the fact that you have to think about another person and that you have to have a long-term commitment and think about a bigger picture is sanctifying of that moment, because it's not just a momentary thing. It's you know that you're investing something much bigger. So that's holiness always means rising above the moment, rising above. So even the most physical act you can do, which sexuality is considered, you see in Judaism that as much as we're not puritanical and we're not Christian, sexuality is the most physical action of a person. There's no bracha when you go to engage in sexual intercourse. There's never any sexual intercourse in any way connected to, let's say, the Beit HaMikdash. There could be eating, but there can't be sexual intercourse. There can't be sexual intercourse, related to anything that is in the sacred, sort of in the sacred realm, in the synagogue, and we never would have that. It's a personal thing. It's a private thing. The enjoyment can be part of your Shabbat enjoyment or your, Yom Tov is a mitzvah, but to incorporate that enjoyment and that pleasure into your experience of Shabbat, but not in any. It's not considered in and of itself something that we would put into the public realm of, in that way. It's something that's reserved for the individual. So in that way, because when you're involved, you have to, you can't be super intellectual when you're involved in sexuality. It's something where the psyche and the emotion, the desire takes over. It's not you're not engaged in like sexual intercourse and having a conversation about something at the same time. It wouldn't really work. You have to focus when you're eating a dinner. You can be eating and talking about all kinds of things. You can engage on two levels, but actually that's why, like sexuality, for example, a person engages in sexual intercourse, they have to go to the mikveh before they come to the Beit HaMikdash. But not because sexuality is dirty or bad, but because the person was in a state of mind that was outside of being able to think about Hashem. You can't think about Hashem during that. It's okay that you shouldn't be thinking about Hashem during that time. That's not the time to think about that. So, but it's healthy and good that you have the time that you're involved in intimacy. But you should realize there's a difference between that and activities that involve the mind at a higher level. Yeah. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering if we should try and go into like why somebody should want that versus like, let's say I don't care about any of that and I just want to do whatever. I don't care about the Torah, whatever, and I just want to do whatever I want to do. Like,
it's hard to reason with somebody like that.
True.
I don't know what I can say to somebody who just want to do whatever they want to do. Then they just want to do whatever they want to do. But if they're interested in living a life that's meaningful and more than a beast, then they might want to. What the Torah is trying to tell you is that in the areas of the physical, you always have two options. You have the option of kiddusha and the option of non-kiddusha. The option of kiddusha is engaging in the physical and enjoying it and satisfying your desires, but doing it in a way that always recognizes a higher purpose, so that you never lose your sense that you have a higher transcendent purpose as a human being, as a Jew, as opposed to the way an animal does. An animal does the same thing. You think you're so much better. The animal eats a hamburger and you eat a hamburger. What's the difference? In fact, the lion eats a hamburger, and he doesn't have to eat for a few more days after that. You have to eat a few hours later. So actually the lion is better than you, Or the animal goes around and he impregnates every single one of the females in the group, and that's it. He moves on, right? So it's like the animals are also engaging in instinctual behavior. The difference between the animal and you is the animal's pure instinct. It just knows it's supposed to do this. It derives satisfaction from it also. It has like a physical pleasure that it's driven to get. And then the female also has goes into heat or whatever, wants to engage in intercourse in order to become pregnant because she's ovulating, like in the animal kingdom. I mean, I guess different animals are different in how they do that, but I'm just giving an example. And then that's how the species continues. God implanted that in the animal kingdom, that the species continues. It's pretty amazing. So in the human framework, we also have that. That's the amazing thing. What is the number one deterrent against men wanting to engage in, let's say, unprotected sexual behavior? They don't want to have a kid, right? That's the number one deterrent. So because they're conscious of that. In other words, the reason for the desire is that it produces kids. That's the natural reason. When you look at the animal kingdom, that's the reason. So if you just want to live as a beast, so you live as a beast, you impregnate everyone, and you live as a beast. If you have a higher purpose in your life, then you say, not only do I recognize that sexuality is part of a relationship that I have with another human being, we also have other elements to our relationship. We're raising a family together. We're building for the future. We're passing down not just our genetic material, we're passing down our values and our teachings to the next generation, keeping it alive. That's a very amazing thing. That turns an action which is would seem to be a very animalistic action into something of tremendous good. Meaning that's why sometimes even in the Kabbalistic literature, or even in some Midrashic literature, the relationship between husband and wife is used as a metaphor of the relationship of the Jewish people to Hashem, or anything like that, or of the Jewish people to Torah, actually, a lot of times. But the idea that the intimacy is a beautiful thing when something positive and it comes from it. And it's the model of intimacy, of unity between two people. It's just that it produces something greater. Yeah.
Is that why the word biblically that's used typically for sexual intimacy is yediyah?
It's used, number one, because it's clean language, right? The Torah always uses clean language. Like the Rambam says, why is Hebrew called Lashon HaKodesh? It's a famous thing. Why is it called the holy language? Because it doesn't have words for sexual things or animal functions of a person. It always uses a metaphor for it, to show that we want to be higher than that. We don't want to make it a thing in itself that has its own word, But the intimacy between a husband and wife has a lot. You have to let down your guard and be vulnerable and let yourself, in a relationship that intimate. And that's part of the reason why sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews is damaging, and that the Nevi'im compare it to idolatry. Why? Because if you could, look what happened with the Benot Moav, the daughters of Moav, they come, or the Midian, Moav, whatever. It's a little bit mixed around in the text which one it was, but that they had the girls come and seduce the men. But why is intimacy with an idolatress or an idolater so bad? Because when you're intimate, you're accepting of the whole person. There's a fusing of the personalities there. You can try to keep yourself aloof from that and say, no, it's just a physical action, but it never is. There's always an emotional, psychological, mental fusing of the people as well in the partnership, and that's why it's so damaging to engage in sexual relations, let's say, with someone who has values that are contradictory to your own, such as an idol worshiper or non-Jew or whoever. That you want to make sure that intimacy is reserved for someone that you feel comfortable giving your all of who you are and accepting the all of who they are. That's why it's so important. It goes back to the basic idea of kedusha, that holiness doesn't mean that we reject the physical or the emotional or the aspects of sexuality that they're not clean or the taboo. Not about that at all. But it has more to do with always remembering that there's a higher purpose in everything that you do. Brit milah is the sexual organ of the man. Why? Because even sexuality is considered a good in Judaism, not a bad thing. It's considered a good thing, but good in the proper context when it is, between in a loving relationship, a committed relationship between a husband and wife that also has the potential to produce children and so on. And when you do a circumcision, what a circumcision is basically saying my sexuality is not just an animal sexuality, because whatever children come from this intercourse, I'm going to also give them the values and teachings of Judaism, something higher than the animal level. My producing of kids is a producing of disciples, not just kids. I'm going to be passing them something higher. That's what the Brit is about.
It's interesting that you brought up Brit
That's why Avram doesn't have any kids until he has Brit Milah. He doesn't have Yitzchak until he has Brit Milah, because it's only then that he can really say that I understand my sexuality is a vehicle of handing the teachings of Torah and knowledge of Hashem to the next generation.
So one of the secular arguments against circumcision actually is the diminishing of the sexual experience.
I know, I've heard that before.
So
they want to sue their parents.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because the
Rambam actually says that's one of the reasons, but approvingly instead of disapprovingly. In other words, by doing it, you're saying sexual gratification is not the be-all and end-all. I'm saying it isn't the be-all and end-all.
You can still have pleasure in the sexual experience.
It still works.
But that's not the purpose.
Right. Anything that you put a limit on cannot be an end in its own right. That's the rule of life. That's why there's elu dvarim she'en lahem shi'ur. There are certain things that there's no measure. You can do as much as you want. Chesed, as much as you can do it. Learning Torah, as much as you can do. Right? But sexuality, there's a limit to it. That doesn't mean it's bad. That just means it has a purpose, and it can't be unlimited. Eating, there's also limits. Kashrut, limits. Don't eat this, don't eat this, don't eat this. Whenever there's a limit, that means that there's a higher purpose that it's serving. So I limit it because of a higher purpose that it's serving. Whenever it's unlimited, that means it's an end in itself. So by diminishing the pleasure ever so slightly, I don't really know. I know they've done studies actually show that it's true. But we would never know because we would never.
I definitely believe that.
Maybe a convert who was uncircumcised and then circumcised would be able to tell us more about that. But I think that they've done scientific studies to prove that's true. But the Rambam says in Nevuchim, and I always think it's funny because they quote him and they're like, "Look, it diminishes sexuality and therefore it's bad." And he's like, "No. The whole point is you're showing that it's not an end in itself. Not that it." That doesn't mean it's bad. The rabbis use sexual metaphors to describe the love of Torah. They use sexual metaphors to describe the intimacy a person should have with the Torah and how much they should enjoy it. Okay? Not only that, there's a very famous story in Masechet Menachot. You may have heard it before, but maybe some of our viewers, listeners that have come this far will not know it. But there's a story about a guy who was addicted to prostitutes. He saw every prostitute in the world. And one day he heard that coming to town was this extremely expensive prostitute. Okay? But she was world renowned, number one, whatever, celebrity. He needed to meet her. So he sent her whatever the huge amount of money was, and he traveled all the way there to see her. Okay? And he got there, and there were 10 beds that he had to climb up, and she was not clothed on the top. And he climbs all the way up. He's so excited. He prepaid, so that's it. He climbs up, and he sees his tzitzit. Because back then they didn't have tzitzit like a separate garment. It was it was part of their clothing. He saw his tzitzit, and all of a sudden he's like, "You know what? You're very beautiful and everything." She said, "Oh my, you don't think I'm beautiful? What? You're leaving?" He said, "You're very beautiful and all that, but I realized Hashem gave us these mitzvot, and I can't do it. I'm not doing the right thing." I saw that it says that tzitzit were smacking him in the face, but that doesn't mean literally. It means that it was as if he looked at it and it was oh my God, what am I doing? I'm doing the wrong thing. So she's like, "I won't let you go unless you give me the name of your rabbi and your Beit Midrash. I want to know it." He said, "Okay, here's my rabbi, Beit Midrash," and he leaves. So this prostitute, I guess the next day, whatever, comes, finds the Beit Midrash, finds the rabbi, says, "Is this student here? He's whatever his name." He's studying in Rabbi Joshua. Yes. I want to convert to Judaism, and I want to marry him. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens in the story. It says she converted. She was so inspired by the fact that he had self-control that she converted to Judaism, and she marries the guy.
Wow.
Right? She said, Why? Because she had never before met a person who actually had control over their urges, even though in the past, obviously, he had been very prolific going after prostitutes, apparently. But finally, he came to a point where he said, Adkan, this is the end. I can't do anymore. Right? I have to control myself. I have to curb my appetite. She was so impressed with that the person had that, because the fact is, and I mentioned when we talked about Sefer Yoshua, about Rachav, that was also a prostitute who becomes Jewish, right? That sex workers look down at men. They don't think they try to make the men feel that they're lavishing attention on them and they love them. They actually hate them. They actually look down at them because they see this powerful man, rich men, famous men, all that, and look how pathetic they are, that they come here and they pay money or whatever for sexual gratification. It's pathetic that they need someone to fool them and play them like that. It's they look down at them. So this guy comes and says, you know what? Even though I paid the money and you're very beautiful, I can't do it. She's like, that is a person that actually has somebody. And then what does it say at the end? So you might say, okay, that's a happily ever after. She became a religious woman. She became a frum lady, and she was no longer a prostitute, obviously, and all that, and she married the guy. No. You know what the story ends? It says, the same beds that she set up for him be'isur, she set up for him beheter. The same beds that she set for him prohibited, now were permitted. What does that mean? He had some sexual fantasy. I don't know. What it's saying is that there's nothing wrong with saying that they did that as a married couple. There was the same exact thing that they would do, 100% kosher in the context of marriage, But the fact that I always thought it was amazing that the Gemara will come out and say the reward, he had a sexual pleasure as his reward, meaning there was nothing wrong with it as long as it was in the context of the marriage. That they did that. The same exact setup, whatever fantasy, climbing up the beds, I don't know. Not my thing. Yeah. It was his thing. Maybe he ordered that. Maybe that was his thing. He asked for that. I don't know what it was.
Climbing up the fence.
Right. It was something special. I have no clue. But the point is that whatever it was, they did that in the context of marriage, and it was 100% glad kosher. So that's the attitude of Judaism towards sexuality. Is it's wonderful in the context of the marriage.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Away from permitted sexual relationship to obviously very hot topic, kind of put you on the spot. What is Judaism's approach to homosexuality? I've heard you speak about this before, but for the people who haven't, what's the approach that we have towards sexuality? What do you think
for homosexuality?
For homosexuality, excuse me.
So. Yeah, I have spoken about it before, and it's probably whenever we have the controversial topic discussions, it's like everyone brings it up. I think it's a very simple thing. The Torah says to'eva, right? So it says it's a to'eva. And unfortunately, because we don't know Hebrew, and we rely on King James Bible or whatever, whoever translates it into English is translated as it is an abomination. Abomination has a very strong emotional sense of disgust behind it. And so people picked up on the idea that this is an abomination, means that it's something disgusting, it's something horrific, this homosexuality, and therefore it's singled out for very strong feelings that responsive disdain against people who are engaging in it. Now the Gemara in Masechet Nedarim says, what does to'eva mean? To'eh huba. He's making a mistake doing it. It doesn't mean, so the way the Gemara interprets the word to'eva is very far from a feeling of visceral disgust. It's saying it's a mistake that the person is making in their life. To'eh huba. In fact, all the sexual prohibitions are called to'eva. Not just homosexuality, but for some reason everyone zeroed in on that. Not only that, there are many other things that are called to'eva that people don't seem to have as much of a problem with. For example, eating non-kosher is called, it says, lo tochal kol to'eva, don't eat any abominable thing, is the translation. I never saw anybody say anyone who eats in McDonald's is to'eva, is abomination. It says idolatry is to'eva. Right? I never heard anybody. It also says, here's the worst or the best example, depending on your perspective. It says cheating people in business is to'eva. Ki to'avat Hashem kol ose ele kol ose avel. Anybody who cheats is called to'eva also. They're no different than homosexual. So according to that, all of these people also should have the same visceral disgust about idolatry, about non-kosher food, and about cheating business. Halavai, that if only we had that same feeling of disgust towards unethical practices. It's all in the same category. But the answer is that it has nothing to do with visceral disgust. The Torah doesn't tell you whether you should like chocolate or vanilla ice cream. It doesn't tell you whether you should like chopped liver. I find chopped liver to be really disgusting. I tried it a few times. Every time I could not tolerate tasting chopped liver. It's disgusting. I don't like herring. Maybe it's the Sephardic, genetically we're predisposed not to like these Ashkenazi foods. I don't know. But disgusting, okay? I never said it should be prohibited because it's disgusting. The Torah doesn't tell you to find things disgusting. Disgusting is subjective. Because what happens is if I say don't do a disgusting thing, what's disgusting to me might be pleasurable to you. What's pleasurable to me might be disgusting to you. Just like the Torah doesn't say work on Shabbat is prohibited and defined work subjectively. Oh, for me, gardening is very enjoyable. It's not work. Well, yeah, but you're digging in the ground, planting. I know, but I like it. It's not work. So it becomes subjective. So everything is subjective. We don't go by subjective feeling. We don't go by disgust. If the Torah just thought something was disgusting, it doesn't have to tell you anything about doing it or not doing it. The Gemara even says that about blood. It says the Torah says that if you eat blood, don't eat blood and you'll have a long life. It's like, who wants to eat blood? The Gemara says, the Mishnah says, who wants to eat blood? Nobody even wants to, and yet it promises you a long life for not doing it, even though nobody wants to do it anyway. They never said that about homosexuality, which is interesting. That they never said nobody wants to do it anyway, because in Greek society it was a commonplace. There was no idea of sexual orientation in the ancient world. There was just sexual actions. And everybody understood. You marry somebody of the opposite sex so that you can have children, and then you go and engage in sexual activity with whomever you want. And Freud was the one who said, it's no more of a mystery to me why men are homosexual than it is why they're heterosexual. Because really a person should just want pleasure, and whatever the source of pleasure, they take it, like the Greeks. Like, that's really what it should be. So how did it come that, to the point where there's a selection that you have an orientation towards, heterosexual versus whatever? He said that that's a mystery to him. Now, you could make all kinds of arguments for why it should be that way because of procreation, but the point is to'ehuba. The way the Gemara didn't say, oh yeah, of course, it's disgusting. To'eva. It said to'ehuba. It's a mistake. What's the mistake? You're separate, and it connects everything that we've said up till now. You're disconnecting sexuality from a higher purpose. You're making sexuality an end in itself. It's just for the gratification because it can't serve any higher purpose in that context in terms of the natural function of sexuality, which is to produce children or to create a family. Now, of course, people will say, well, what about when the wife is pregnant? What about after menopause where they can't have children then either? Yeah, but it's in a relationship in which a family is possible to be created. This is a different story. It's a type of relationship that we're talking about. We're talking about a relationship in which the sexual expression has a higher function, even if it's not being actualized at that point, as opposed to a relationship in which the sexual behavior is, by definition, truncated, disconnected from its natural function of producing children. So to'ehuba just means you're understanding sexuality in the wrong way. And keeping in mind that in the times of Tanakh, I doubt that there was a concept at all. We know that from the times of the ancient Greeks, which overlaps roughly with the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, they didn't have a concept of sexual orientation. They had a concept of homosexual behavior. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Torah is saying to avoid. The Torah is saying don't be gay. I don't think they had an idea of being gay. It says don't lie with the man the way you lie with the woman, which is what the Greeks did. Now the Torah predates the Greeks, but I'm saying it's discussing a behavior. Mm-hmm. It's saying that behavior disconnects sexuality from its purpose. You shouldn't engage in it. It's to'ehuba, it's a mistake. Just like making a physical image of God is a mistake about God's transcendence, and therefore it's a to'eva. So too, and eating non-kosher is making a mistake about eating, and that it should be also dedicated to a holy purpose. This is making a mistake about sexuality and thinking that it should be disconnected from its purpose. Nothing to do with the visceral feelings that a person has. I personally think, my opinion is that a person should have zero feeling about it. And if you have any feeling about it, it's just a psychological hang-up. That's an extreme position, but that's my thought. I don't think a person should have any feeling about it either way. If I see people, if you see a man and a woman kissing in public, tell them to go in private. If you see a man and a man, also tell them to go in private. I don't want to see any of it. You know, it's all not for public consumption. But like, having a visceral reaction to of disgust, that's come from your own psychological baggage. It has nothing to do with the behavior that they're engaged in, because there's a lot of other things that Torah says that are toivan. You don't have any feeling like that.
Right.
So why are you deciding that this particular action, you're singling it out? Say you're so disgusted by it. What about a guy worships an idol and thinks it's God? That's also toivan. Well, why are you not saying that that's the worst thing I've ever seen? That person thinks the creator of the universe is a statue. That's real. That should offend you, but you're not getting that upset about that. Yeah. But a guy engaging in certain things, okay, it's not allowed by the Torah, but why should I have any more disgust about that than any other activity that the Torah says is wrong that the person does?
Yeah.
There's 613 mitzvot, not just one.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who said, well, why is it fair to pick on that action, like to stop them from doing that action? Like if you had feelings of, like let's say somebody told you that heterosexual relationships were prohibited, what would you do? Have you heard?
Well, the species would end.
Right, but
so that would be a big problem. That's the main right. answer, actually.
But more in terms of the feelings, meaning like that's the desire of that person.
I understand that. Look, I understand I'm not saying I don't mean to belittle the challenges of people who are gay. It's not a small matter. But there are many people who have desires for things that they can have that leave them very unhappy. And that's their challenge in life. Because there are people who have desires for somebody that's not married to them. Mm-hmm. And they married somebody else. And they spend their life, I wish I could be married to that person. You can't. It's not, they're not available to you. And they can't get over it. It only has to be that person. There are people like that. So there are people that have desires sometimes, and God forbid a person could have a desire that's even worse. It'd be pedophilia. I mean, I don't want to. People get very offended. You compare homosexuality to pedophilia, but I'm using it only
academically,
right? Academically, in the sense of a desire for something that's prohibited, that will leave them very unhappy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, obviously, they can't gratify that desire, but you're not going to go and say that. Well, you're denying them the right to be a full human being by not letting them gratify that desire. Now, I understand the argument. The argument against that is, well, yeah, but the reason why we don't let that person gratify the desire is because he's violating the rights of a child that doesn't have the ability to consent. Whereas this, it's two consenting adults. That's a very good argument from when you're only looking at it in terms of the practicality of things. Right. But what I'm saying is, I'm telling you can't do this activity because there's a higher purpose to sexuality, and that's what's limiting you, not the consent or non-consent of the other person, but something higher than you that's not another human being, that's difficult for them to accept and challenging, but a person who's able to do it and direct their energies to a higher purpose is like, that's their test, that's their nisayon. A person can have all kinds of impulses to do things that are unhealthy or that are that contradict values of Torah, but they overcome them for the sake of a higher purpose. I don't mean to make it seem that it's a small thing. I realize it's a major thing.
Yeah. How would you counsel somebody who came to you and shared with you that they were having feelings of that they were gay, that they were attracted to other men? How would you counsel this kind of?
It's hard to think about it in the abstract, because
let's just say there's a guy in the community, young guy that wants to keep the Torah, and he tells you, Rabbi, I have this problem that I think I'm gay. I have these feelings about men, that I'm attracted to men and I'm not attracted to women. How do we counsel somebody like that?
Well, it's important for them to come to be honest with themselves and address who they really are and what their feelings actually are. First, to be, to not deny them or try to definitely not get in a relationship with a woman where they really aren't attracted to them and they're faking it because that's doing harm to the spouse. To like live a lie would not be healthy for them, and it wouldn't be right. It would be dishonest to their spouse. But as an individual, obviously, they're facing a challenge. Everybody has their set of challenges in life. Challenges take all kinds of different forms. There are people who are mamzerim, they can't marry people. There are people, there's all kinds of different challenges that a person has. And they have to learn to accept who they are and to rise above that. If they have the strength to be able to keep the Torah and do the right thing, then that would be what I would encourage them to do. And but at the same time, if they slip and they err in that area, that doesn't mean that you're rejected by God. That just means that you made a mistake, like somebody who breaks Shabbat, like somebody who eats non-kosher, like somebody who violates any other prohibition of the Torah. There's a possibility of teshuvah, and there's a possibility that you can do a lot of other good things. Don't let yourself be defined by the one area that you're stumbling in. And I think that people oftentimes when they're gay, unlike any other, a person could be non-shomer Shabbat and they feel a part of the Jewish community. They could be eating McDonald's and feel a part of the Jewish community, but they're gay. All of a sudden, they feel like they have to become an unbeliever and they're out of the camp completely. Why does it have to be like that? Why can't we just say, okay, look, some people don't keep this mitzvah that's also a very serious prohibition. Some people don't keep this, what's a very serious prohibition. And if you eat non-kosher meat, you're probably eating gid hanasheh, all kinds of other prohibitions in there, chelev, which is also an isur karet, same as violating Shabbat, same as homosexuality, it's all the same. And yet you still come to Kanisa, you still are involved in Jewish community, and you're trying to keep all the other mitzvot that you can. Let's say, hopefully, a person's trying, they're doing their best. So this person also, do your best. Okay, to the extent that you can avoid the prohibition, you're doing a great mitzvah because you're overcoming a challenge that most people don't have. We all have challenges. You're overcoming a challenge most people don't have, and you're doing something to demonstrating your commitment to the proper understanding of sexuality and human life and what Kedusha really is. That is, especially hard in your case because you don't have an outlet to express it that's considered kosher. In that case, he is lahavdil, like a situation of a pedophile or something like that. Not to put them on the same, in the same way, but they're blocked in that way by a different thing, by the Torah instead of by the rights of a minor. Okay, but that's that's their challenge. I heard actually that Lubavitcher Rebbe was asked by one of his students by Chabad, a Chabadnik, I guess. That he was gay and he didn't know what to do, and the Rebbe said, "It's good. So go. You won't have a family. You won't have you won't have children. You're not inclined to. So you can do even more for the Jewish people. You can go do more, invest your energies and all of these things, and you won't have to worry about it." Now it's easier said than done. Maybe if this person feels unfulfilled in the area of sexuality, but to the extent they can sublimate that energy to higher things, like kol hakavod to them if they can do that. It's a challenge. And I would say that the person has to be honest with themselves. They have to try their best to live up to what the Torah asks of them. And if they stumble and they fall, they have to be able to pick themselves up and continue on and not throw out the baby with the bathwater, just like any other sin, so to speak, that a person would do. There's nothing that makes it. What I'm saying is, there's nothing that makes homosexuality more defining of the person than any other avera that they do. There's nothing that makes it more disgusting or lowly than anything else that a person does that's against the will of God, against the will of the Torah. And there's no reason why it should be singled out. It's something that it does not come from Judaism, because you can see the Torah does not single it out as one pasuk. It doesn't single out. It doesn't emphasize it. It doesn't come from Judaism, that emphasis. So it's coming from the psychological framework, and it's coming from the Christian society in which we live. It's no different than any other. It's a serious violation. Being with a married woman is a serious violation. Incest is a serious violation. Nida is a serious violation, and this is a serious violation. It is. But so is Chilul Shabbat, so is eating a bacon cheeseburger, and all these other things. And we don't make as big of a deal out of those things. So worshipping an idol, for sure, is the same penalty, Isur Karet, death penalty. It's called a To'eva also. So that's the same. There's no reason why it should be singled out. It has to be treated the same as all other serious prohibitions. The person has to strive to live by the wisdom of the Torah, and will find that through overcoming that challenge, they will reach a very high level of Kedusha. They will reach a very high level of knowledge of Hashem if they're able to do that. It really will be an act of courage and commitment to do it, and very impressive. But if they, again, if they slip, it's no different than slipping in any of these other areas, and there's no reason for it to be isolated as especially bad, and I don't understand why it is. It's only, I do understand why it is, but it's for psychological reasons that people have hang-ups. It has zero to do with the Torah. The Torah doesn't say that, and Hashem doesn't say that, because Hashem doesn't have psychological hang-ups. So he doesn't. It's the people who have psychological baggage that are creating this. They're creating this guilt about it.
So a person that is not attracted to women, they don't have a mitzvah of pruvu anymore?
Maybe it's anus, I think. They're not able to. So what are they going to do? They don't have a desire. They're not going to be able to do it.
Right.
If they have, some people have fluid sexuality that's a little easier to handle. They can channel it into relationship with a woman instead of a man. Like they're bisexual, or they have a more fluid sort of sexual identity. But if they purely are not interested, there is a psychological condition where a person feels uncomfortable with their sexual orientation, wants to change it. I don't really think that there's much, I don't think that research really supports that works. I don't think that it works. So,
trying to change
your sexual orientation, I don't think that it works. We don't really understand that much about sexual orientation, the etiology of it, meaning what the source is, whether it's genetic. My hunch from seeing some people who grew up to be gay that I knew when they were born or young is that it is genetic. There may also be some environmental factors. There's a genetic component. There's definitely a genetic component to most cases, if not all. And there could be other environmental triggers too, but it also could be purely genetic, because it seems like what they call like the secondary characteristics of homosexuality, the femininity in men, things like that, appear in boys that end up being gay from when they're like really little kids, before they even show any sexuality, meaning before they show anything what we would call mature sexuality. When they're 5-6 years old, they're already acting feminine and doing things that we would associate with, quote, the stereotypical gay guy. So it seems to be genetically rooted for sure, and it also seems to run in families.
That's interesting. Yeah. Just for clarity purposes, it doesn't work the other way, right? Like, let's say you have a boy that is more feminine. Let's say like a 5-year-old boy that is more feminine. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're
no, it's not always,
because you have the opposite also.
It's not always. Yeah.
Meaning you have
there's some people that have like feminine characteristics and they're totally heterosexual.
Right.
I'm just saying that in boys who oftentimes turn out to be gay, they have certain features that later kind of coalesce into this gay, into that stereotypical persona. But I'm not saying that it's not for sure. Yeah. There's many cases where it's not the case. Then you have a situation of transgender, which to me at least seems much more psychologically pathological. Like I it doesn't seem healthy to me. But and I know that's very political.
It doesn't seem healthy to you.
That's politically incorrect to say it. But somebody who's like, there's a concept of body dysmorphic disorder. There are disorders where a person feels, I'm really a woman in a man's body. I'm really a man in a woman's body, but you're not actually. You're a man or a woman based on what your body is. You might feel like you're a very feminine man or you're a very masculine woman, but your body is what it is. They're unhappy with their body, and it seems to me, and maybe I'll be shown to be wrong, but because I'm not up on the most current literature, and I know now it's super politically incorrect to talk about it, so you can't actually get a straight answer, which is unfortunate.
You can't do the research.
You can't do the research; it'll get thrown out of academia.
Right.
But it seems like there's a high suicide rate among transgender people
in general.
Whether or not they have the gender reassignment surgery doesn't help.
It doesn't change.
Right.
The suicide rate doesn't change
right.
after
and people want to say that that's because they're socially ostracized, but it doesn't seem like that it's correlated with that, because now we have a society that's accepting, and they have community that they can find acceptance in. It's no different than homosexuality in that sense, that you have a sort of a minority community that's now accepted, and people have, they've found their niche, that they are, that they can be validated for whatever they are, and they still are experiencing high rate of suicide. So that's why it seems to me that there's some deeper dissatisfaction with the self.
Yeah.
That's expressing itself in that. Now, I know that's really politically incorrect. People are going to be really upset. Hopefully not a lot of people will see this.
Yeah, hopefully not.
And I won't be banned, but that's my sense.
Very important.
I did know one person, a very interesting story of a person who went through the surgery, ended up reverting back to their original identity because they didn't feel that they really, that they integrated well. So, but that person was pretty psychologically balanced otherwise. They were pretty psychologically functional otherwise. They never seemed to be suicidal or anything like that. I think that they're fine. But they went from being a man to a woman back to a man. I mean, obviously without the equipment the second time around. Yeah. You don't get that back. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's very important, especially in this day and age, and it's scary. It's very scary to have the politically incorrect conversations and the research, but I think it's never been more important to have those kinds of conversations, because at the end of the day, the people who are suffering are the people who are going through it, meaning our not having sober conversations about it, and our not having sober research about it.
You're not really caring about those people.
It's not caring about them. It's just pandering.
If you really care about those people, you want to know what's actually going on and what actually would be the best intervention for them.
Yeah, and again,
you don't just want to give in to whatever their immediate inclination is, because it's because you don't know that that's really what's best for them. But we have an idea in our society that if they feel a certain way, you have to validate it. It's like. You have to validate it in the sense that you have to hear it out, you have to listen to it, you have to try to understand it, but maybe we should try to understand it better before we jump to the conclusion that they should tear their body, change their body around, rearrange the parts, and then find out that they're still unhappy. So we're not really helping those people. Now there might be some people that are transgender and it seems like they're well adjusted and they do okay. So those people will say, okay, we're not included, but the large number, there's such a high suicide rate for a reason. It's not just because they're ostracized, because homosexuals were ostracized in our society for a very long time, until maybe 20, 30 years ago, still, even more recently, but until, however recently you want to pin it. But but they never had that. And it's not like a community in the same way as homosexuality. In other words, the number of homosexuals is maybe 2 to 4% of the population or something like that. It's a small percent. People think it's because you see so many gay people on television now, or if people watch television or in the media, you think every other person is gay, but it's actually a small percentage, right? But transgender is obviously even smaller. So that's not the only reason they don't have so they don't have as much of it's more like an individual journey for each of them. A lot of times it seems like and it doesn't, it's not, there's a mystery there. What is the reason that they have such a high suicide rate? And it seems to me that they're unhappy with something deeper, and their dissatisfaction with their sexual identity is just a symptom of something deeper. Gender identity, right. Yeah, because it doesn't have to be the sexual identity, right? It's something deeper than, because the person that I know that was transgender didn't change their sexual identity at all. They actually still liked women even when they were a woman. Yeah. I guess Caitlyn Jenner is the same, right? Still okay, so it's not the sexual identity, but their own sense of gender, their dissatisfaction with their body or whatever, is itself maybe symptomatic of something even deeper. Not to say that they're not really experiencing that dissatisfaction, but they are. But it's the fact that it's not fixed by changing their body. And there's actually one rabbi wrote a tshuva trying to argue that gender reassignment surgery should be allowed because it's pikuach nefesh, because certain people they become despondent.
But the data shows that it's not.
Right, the data shows it doesn't help. That's the problem. So even if you wanted to make that argument, which is an interesting argument, I don't know, but even if you want to make that argument, it doesn't work. So you end up with the problem that it's, the solution is not really fixing the problem. It's not really a solution.
Right. Yeah, the way that I kind of feel about it is if I have a patient that comes to me and they have a high blood pressure, right? and I'll tell them, okay, we need to start medication. Like we've tried the conservative management, we need to start medication. No, I really don't want to start medication. Like that's not what I want. Am I doing them a favor by telling them, okay, fine.
Okay, we won't do it.
Yeah, no problem.
Right.
Yeah, your blood pressure, you live at 180/100, but that's okay.
That's okay. I'll be living on the edge. Our political correctness about these issues is hopefully eventually saner.
Yeah.
And right now, I think our society, my impression is that for the past decade or so, our society has been overcorrecting for its more puritanical, conservative views that dominated for so long. And it was overcorrecting by basically saying anyone who even suggests that there could be something not equally good, but that homosexuality is in any way not as good as heterosexuality, or that someone who's transgender is in any way not as valid as someone who's happy with their natural gender or whatever, that they are the worst violator of the social contract, and they should be expelled from society, and their business should be ruined, and we should never, and they should be canceled from our, from society. So we've gone to the opposite extreme to correct for what was too judgmental and too closed and too, puritanical of a view. Now we have to find something in the middle, and I think usually with these societal trends, that's what happens. That you go to one extreme, you go to the other extreme, and then it might not be it might take 10, 20 years. I don't know how long it's going to take eventually to come to and eventually it'll be written in the history books. For a while, they said that, they went to this, just like now they will say, well, in the 50s and 60s being gay, or 70s even, it was, you were treated like an outcast. And then it became slowly better and so on. And then, one day they'll write in the history books, for a while, anything went. And if you even suggested you didn't want to participate in a gay wedding, you would destroy your business and kick you out of society. Now we understand that there's different perspectives and, or maybe that transgenderism, there's different cases warrant different solutions. We can't always go with the first impulse of the patient to decide their treatment. Yeah. But this is like type of thing that like almost every medical and psychological trend has had this kind of a backlash, like the electroshock therapy for or lobotomies. I don't know, with different invasive procedures that they thought really helped. Lobotomies work, they work because if somebody's really aggressive and you give them a lobotomy, they become very calm. That's what they thought. Yeah. They thought it worked.
Yeah. By the way, electroshock therapy. Yeah, it's actually used even today as
but not as
for depression.
Yeah, for depression. Yeah,
for like the end
not as much as it used to be. It used to be like much more widely used. Lobotomies were used, which is really crazy. Which basically just like the trauma of cutting their brain in half made them like a vegetable, and they're like, they're so calm now. It's so good, But like at that time, that's what you did. Yeah. So then later on, you end up they end up realizing, we went to an extreme with that. We should have. So I think extremes eventually iron themselves out. I don't know exactly how it will happen, but hopefully our society, after trying to overcorrect for some excesses in the other direction, will. And look, we had major issues with racism in our country, so we went to the opposite extreme trying to correct it. Eventually, we'll come to a more equitable system where we don't have to worry about it, hopefully, as much, because things will be fair and equitable across the board. And so too with these issues, if we're able to talk about them honestly and actually address them, we'll be able to help people.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, is just to be able to honestly and very soberly just address these topics, and really, especially from a medical perspective, just to be able to say, like, I want the best for my patients, and there isn't any reason why a doctor or anybody in the medical field should be restricted or even feel restricted from doing the research so that we can present the best options for our patients. It might be that transition is really the best option. That's definitely a possibility. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm belittling anybody that is transgender, is homosexual, or anything that we've spoken about. No, definitely not. Like I've had patients that are homosexual. Haven't yet actually had a patient that was transgender, I don't believe, but like I imagine that will happen. I don't want to ostracize anybody in that category. Quite the opposite. I always want to be able to present them with the best medical options and the best.
Right. We can't cut off knowledge. We can't cut off knowledge.
And that's the
because we're afraid that we're going to discover something that's politically incorrect, or that our results of our research will be protested and banned, even though it's objective research. You can't really protest and ban knowledge because you're actually doing a disservice to yourself. Because if there's knowledge out there that could benefit transgender individuals, and we're not privy to that knowledge because we're not allowed to research and find out what's actually best for them, so then we're not actually helping them. We might in some cases by accident be helping them by doing what they want, what they ask for, meaning what they think is the solution. But like you said, if a person comes in and says, I want this medicine for my problem, well, that medicine doesn't help your problem. I don't care. I want to have that medicine. We wouldn't give it to them.
You get that more than you think.
Right, I'm sure. Now they have on commercials that they tell you, ask your doctor about this medicine, ask your doctor about that medicine. It's like, so they put in the mind of the patient all kinds of things. They come in already diagnosing themselves and having an idea what medicine they want before they get there.
Exactly.
That's it. So it's like
I have an infection in my throat. I need antibiotics.
Right, they know right away. Right, sometimes they could be right, but it's
they could be right. It's happened.
I know my wife one time had shingles. Recently, like the last year. She figured it out herself. She looked at what it was. She looked up. She did research. Like she went to the doctor, said, "I think I have shingles," and she did. Yeah, it happens.
It definitely happens, but a lot of people.
But you can't allow the patient to
it's like
rule on that issue.
You know what? Actually, I just examined you, and it appears that you have a viral infection. It's not antibiotics won't help you. We're going to promote resistance. No, I need.
No, I know what I need. It's this.
I've had it before. The Z-Pack help. Right. You encounter it all the time.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where knowledge is important, and obviously people will still be resistant to the knowledge. They could still say, well, we don't want to accept those results. We think they're flawed, or they could say that those, they could make whatever argument they want. Or they could, there might be differences of opinion among medical practitioners what the right thing is to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But having research-based treatment is really critical, and a lot of people in the transgender community seem to be dealing with psychological issues that go beyond the transgender.
Just the issue of transitioning.
The issue of transitioning or the issue of being dissatisfied with their gender. And that's what needs to be addressed. Why there's so much comorbidity in that? It's severe. It's not just that they're transgender and also that they're severely depressed to the point of being suicidal. It's not accidental that that's coinciding in so many cases.
Right.
So I think that more research would help them, not harm them. But it's politically incorrect to research anything in that area right now because like I was saying before, we're so hypersensitive to communities that have been traditionally ostracized and or individual. I'm not sure if transgender considers it itself a community, but I guess so. Groups of people that have traditionally been ostracized or otherwise disenfranchised or belittled by our society. So we're trying to make up for that by going to the opposite extreme. But it's there has to be. It's like when if we go too far to the opposite extreme, it's to the detriment of everyone. Yeah. So I agree with you about that.
Yeah. I've taken a ton of your time.
My pleasure.
Because you're going, for those who don't know, Rabbi Maroof is actually leaving us for a much better place. He's moving to Artzina Kedosha. He's making Aliyah to Israel, and we're very, very, very excited for him. I just want to kind of ask you, what made you want to make the move? What was the ultimate motivation?
I don't know if my motivation is any different than... did I disconnect?
I think we're good.
I'm so good? Okay. I don't know if my motivation is any different than anyone else who makes Aliyah. I don't think that it's anything special. Since I was married, my wife and I had dreamt of making Aliyah because we believe that the future of the Jewish people is in Israel. The Torah tells us that that's where the Jewish community should be built, the Jewish nation should be built. It's being built. We want to be part of that future and part of that story. And we feel like diaspora or Jews of the exile, this is going to be part of history, not future. One day at least. And as much as we're thankful for having lived in America, it's a great country to live in, and there's no question about it. Very hospitable to Jews and Torah and learning and everything, and we all benefited from it, from being here. Certainly better than Iran, which would have been the alternative, I guess, for me.
Yeah.
That's no question. But Israel is the place that Hashem chose to be the place that would where we would establish the Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, the holy nation that's going to sanctify His name. We want to be part of that. Like, I want my kids to grow up in a culture, and they're already growing up, but I want them to be part of a culture where Judaism is woven into the fabric of the society. I want my grandchildren to grow up with Hebrew and Judaism and the values of Torah a part of their daily and their daily life, their living experience, instead of saying to them, oh, in Israel they do it like this, here we do it like this.
Yeah.
To be able to live it the way that the Torah was, meant to be lived. And like I said, really ultimately to be part of the story of the future of the Jewish people. Because if we want to be honest with ourselves, we may be in America for a while longer, but this is not our permanent destination. And every other country that has been hospitable to the Jewish people and hosted them, it's been temporary. It might be for a long time, but it's still temporary. The final destination has to be Israel, because that's the place Hashem chose for us to create His nation. And I want to be able to be a part of that. And I'm jealous when I see little kids in Israel that they grew up there. And even though I can speak Hebrew, to see kids that grew up with Hebrew and they grew up immersed in that culture and they grew up going to the places that the Tanakh talks about and having that history and heritage be a part of their consciousness. I wish I had that. I wish I could have served in the army. I wish I could have done my part and been a part of it. And so many times I tried over the years to find a job there, to find employment there, to figure out a way to get there, and never worked out. And finally we kind of said, you know what? We're at a stage of our lives where we just have to make a leap with a partial plan instead of a perfect plan and work out the details when we arrive on the other side. Otherwise, it's never going to happen after 20 plus years of dreaming. So, and Bezrat Hashem, to be part of that future and to be able to, at least for my grandchildren, my kids, my grandchildren, to have the benefit of that and to see that. And, because I see all these people that they've done that and you say, wow. Look, their kids, their grandchildren, they've grown up there. They're writing the next chapter of the story of the Jewish people. And we're going to be a footnote on it instead of in the main text.
Yeah.
That's why, and that's why you're going to come. Bezrat Hashem.
Amen. Yeah, I was speaking to my wife about a lot of Americans go and they don't have the best accent. Right, You, Baruch Hashem, don't have this problem.
It's not too bad.
You can blend a little bit more, but the average American that makes Aliyah, Ani wrote a picture, right?
Ani
mechapes picture. Yeah, and it's not always the best.
Rocky Brit.
Rocky Brit, exactly. Yeah. And I was telling my wife, I'm like, on one hand, it's very embarrassing to be that guy. And for example, I'll see these guys who they've been there 40 years and they still have their Persian accent. At the shuk, they're
right, yeah.
They have this very strong Persian accent, and you could tell that they're Persians immediately. But
my family that immigrated to Israel from Iran, they have that. Yeah.
I think the perspective is, it's a badge of honor if you really think about it. These people who made the move, that they don't have the picture. They're the people who were the Olim. They were the people who were, in their generations, B'ezrat Hashem, are going to live in Israel.
And they do, and they're there. A lot of those older people.
And I think it's very powerful, to realize that these people, they left the comfort of a different, maybe not always the comfort, but in the case of Americans, I would say most
they left comfortable places.
And they made the move for something greater.
For an ideal.
For an ideal, exactly. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of merit in having, it is you sound like an American, but on the other hand, it's you made that conscious choice to make that move, and you should, a person should wear that a badge of honor. That
You're right. They made a sacrifice. They came from somewhere else, and they did it.
Yeah.
They made the leap. They weren't just born into it. Like I was saying, that my son graduated this morning from high school in Shalvim. He already has lived in Israel for 3 years. Lucky him.
Yeah.
And the Rosh Hashiva said, he said in Hebrew, but I'm translating for you, But he said, I didn't have the zechut to make aliyah because I was born here. My father or my grandfather, I forget what he said, made aliyah, and I was born here. But you are coming here, so you have the zechut that you're fulfilling this mitzvah. Man, that's basically what you're saying. Basically coming, or like what Boaz said to Ruth is really that you came to a place, you left your mother and father and came to a place that you didn't know. to come under the wings of the divine presence and to be part of the Jewish people. Like, their geography also meant national identity, also meant religious identity. So she was coming to become a Jew and to live in Israel. But like he said, you left everything. You left your mother and your father, and you came to a place that you didn't know, and it's to start a new life. And it's not easy to leave behind her. She was comfortable where she came from, but she did it for an ideal. So yeah, look, I said in Shai Rachamim when I spoke about it, I said, I could wait until I'm older and go. I could go as a retiree. I could do all these things. But I want to make a sacrifice to go, because that shows how important something is when we're willing to make a sacrifice. And that's true of anything in life. It's like, if you're willing to sacrifice, like the Rambam says, if a person says, I'm comfortable, when I'm comfortable, I'll learn. When I have time, right? When I have time, I'll learn. Like Pirkei Avot says, he will never become Talmid Chacham. So meaning, even if the person wins the lottery the next day and he retires and he sits and learns, he'll never be a Talmid Chacham. Why? Because for him, learning was a luxury. He said, when I have the time. Okay, now he has the time, so he's doing it. But it was a luxury. He didn't sacrifice to do it. He didn't make time. It just fell in his lap. That's not the same thing as picking up and saying, you know what, I'm gonna make a sacrifice, I'm gonna go. And so like, it means something to show how much it means to go and to make a sacrifice, when basically I'm extremely thankful. I'm probably in the best place I've ever been. I think it is really the best place we've ever been, the best job I've ever been, the best community. Like, I'm treated so well. Israelis are not going to treat me so nice. They're not as warm and fuzzy. I've been treated really well and love this community. Like, the fact that I'm giving that up for Israel is like a tribute to what Israel means. Yeah. It's not me. It's a tribute to how significant Israel is, that I would give that up for Israel. And to me, that's a meaningful gesture to say I'm giving something up to go. I'm not waiting until, okay, well, I don't have any other place to go anyway, so I guess I'll go there. So Be'ezrat Hashem will be for the best, and hopefully others will follow, because our goal is not just for us to go, but for everyone to join us.
Amen. Yeah. So really commend you like crazy for having the courage for going and like really making that leap, because I know it is a leap. Like, you guys are, Baruch Hashem, in a very good place in this community, and we're gonna miss you guys like crazy. And for everybody who is getting Rabbi Maroof's Torah here, Be'ezrat Hashem, Yeshivat De'ah V'Haskil will hopefully.
It's going to continue for sure.
Still,
the website will still be getting new content.
Me personally, I'm still like, I get all your content.
And you convinced me to write a book, so hopefully that will be coming down the pipeline too.
No, really, hopefully. Separate conversation.
But yeah.
But yeah, Be'ezrat Hashem will still have access to your Torah, and
we can do these over Zoom. It's no problem.
It works. I have thoughts. Maybe hopefully the next time
we'll see a different background behind me.
Yeah, exactly. Next one, hopefully in Israel.
Yeah, why not? On Mir Peset.
Yeah, that's actually great.
Why not? It will be nice to see the view of Israel.
Yeah. No. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
This was heavy duty stuff.
It was. Sorry to put you on the spot. No, I thought it was important.
I think it was a good conversation. I think people will benefit from it.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I hope so. I think it was we got into it and we didn't we didn't censor anything.
Yeah, I wanted it to